Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome back to the Day 71 news of the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. This is the beginning of Week 10. You heard that right. The Ukrainian military has withstood a Russian onslaught for 10 whole weeks, and today is the start of that week. In just 4 days, we will be at May 9th, which is, of course, the Victory Day for Russia and most of the Eastern European countries that were formerly part of the Soviet Union. This day is a massive cultural event in most countries like Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, and so on. And the Russians, of course, will be holding a Victory Day parade as usual. One thing we do not know, however, is what will this Victory Day parade look like, and will it be lacking any vehicles due to them being lost in heavy numbers during the war? We're not entirely sure yet. We will, of course, have to wait. But with that, we have a couple of announcements to make before the start of the news tonight. Starting off, we are still running the limited edition merch run, and it will be available until tomorrow at midnight at Eastern time. I'm sorry if I butchered that a little bit, but it is a very neat limited edition drop. It has a very neat design, and it's also based off of a World War II propaganda poster, which does make it pretty neat. Once again, all merchandise sales do help out this channel a whole load, and 10% of the profits on the merch will actually go towards a Ukrainian charity. So, with that out of the way, let's get to the schedule for the news tonight. Starting off, we will actually be skipping Kyiv tonight. That'll actually be the way we're rounding out the news tonight, and we're actually going to start at the location unknowns. We're going to cover the location unknowns, which we actually have a small amount of tonight, which I like. It actually means that we've been able to track down where most of it's occurred today. And then we'll go into Russia to, of course, watch a bit of insanity unfold on Russian TV. We will then move on back down towards Kharkiv. But before we actually start covering the news in the Kharkiv area and also the northern part of the Donbass, we're going to take 3 questions from the chat and answer them as best as possible. And then we're going to move on to the Kharkiv and Luhansk regions of the front. And then once we get through all the Luhansk news as well, which will include Kramatorsk, we will then pause once more to take another 3 questions from the chat, so that way everyone can have a little bit of a break from the news, and also we can recognize supporters of this channel who do help us to keep running these streams every night. After that, we will then continue with the rest of the news for today, covering the news that occurred in the Donetsk region of the Donbass. We will then cover the Mariupol news, also the remainder of the Southern Front news, which will only have 1 bit of news from down there. And then we will wrap up with the news in Belarus, and finally, an address from President Zelensky, which will then round out the stream for tonight. So I hope everyone's looking forward to the schedule. We do have some incredibly good news today, hence the title of tonight's stream. And so, without further ado, let's get straight into the news. Starting off at the location unknowns, we've seen tonight that the Ukrainians have destroyed more Russian tanks. I'm not exactly sure what kind of system they are using to destroy these tanks. We've never seen a sight like this before, but still, we have seen the Russian tanks get destroyed, which is hindering the Russian offensive or the Russian positions in this area, and will eventually be weakening and kind of softening up their BTGs for the eventual Ukrainian counterattacks that seem to be prevalent across the entirety of the front line at the moment. And so here is the video. We can now see the missile on its way. We can see that the scope this guy is looking through is moving around a pretty heavy bit, so I'm assuming that the scope actually doesn't have anything to do with aiming. And we can now see that the first vehicle was hit and exploded. We can now see them firing a second projectile that is now on the way. I'm assuming towards this BMP here in the bottom right of the scope. And we can see that was a direct hit directly on the rear and left side. Once again, I'm actually going to rewind this clip because this guy has a spiritual reaction to hitting that tank. I'm just going to let y'all hear it for yourselves because it's crazy.
Yes! Хорош! Хорош!
It's of course great to hear that the Ukrainians are still knocking out Russian vehicles. Unfortunately, we don't know the specific location, but they have had a general trend today of knocking out some of Russia's best vehicles, including the best tank that they can actually field in sizable numbers. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we've seen Russian Malkas in Ukraine. This is, of course, just some pictures of the Malkas in operation. We don't have any more videos of them, but it does look like one of the Malkas we saw on video yesterday, and it looks like pictures have come out today of the same Malka unit in operation. As we can see here, just multiple pictures of the Malka firing. Hopefully these Malkas will be destroyed by Ukrainian artillery or a drone strike, as we do know that a large amount of Russian artillery has been destroyed in that fashion, and we've also seen some more evidence of that today. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Russians hitting Ukrainian barracks somewhere in the country. We're not exactly sure where this was, of course, that's why it's a location unknown, and we don't actually know if these barracks were occupied, but we did see that the Russians hit them, and I will, of course, have to mute it because it does have copyrighted music in it. Without further ado, here's the video. As we can see here, there are some silhouettes of figures walking along the sidewalk. We can now see explosions erupting around the supposed barracks site, and it looks like there was a direct hit to the side of the building near the top of the screen, and now on the right side of the screen. Once again, we do not know the extent of the damage, and we do not know if any Ukrainian soldiers were wounded or killed. Hopefully there were none that were killed, and only wounded at best. But still, we can see that the Russians are still trying to attack the Ukrainian units, most likely far behind the lines, where this barrack is really out of sight of the Russian front. We do know, however, that while the Russians are attempting to destroy Ukrainian sites behind the lines, the Ukrainians are still not thwarted by these efforts, and they have been met with general success across most of the front lines, except for an area here and there, which we will get to later on in this video. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of the location unknown news, where we can see a Mysta artillery piece firing. I want to make a correction on this today because this was actually one of the clips included in the Enforcer short clips today, which I hope you all did enjoy, and a lot of people were saying that this was an M777 howitzer. And to that, unfortunately, I'd have to disagree. First off, it has a shield near the back of the breech, which is not indicative of an M777 howitzer. This is indicative of a Mista B artillery piece. I'll pull that up for y'all just so that y'all can see the comparison. Here's an M777, as I call it. It's a lot easier to pronounce. Here's a picture of that. You can also see these very distinctive plow-shaped, I guess you could call it, I forgot the specific name. Anyways, I'm just going to note, not getting into the name or terminology of it or anything, but you can note that there's these kind of plow-shaped apparatus that come from the rear of the artillery piece and kind of implant themselves into the ground. And in this video, those are not present. There's just two long struts from the rear, well, from the bottom of the artillery piece where the wheels are that helps it to be moved around. Also, to move on from that, I'm going to show y'all a Mysta B, which is the artillery piece that I'm saying this is. And you can see here that this is the exact artillery piece that is being used in this video. You can see the shield that is on this piece. You can also see that the legs are extended in the exact same fashion as this one, and you can also see that the muzzle brake is the exact same design. So this is not an M777 in this video, this is actually a Mysta B. And as far as I've been able to tell on this channel, I haven't actually seen any videos of M777s being used by the Ukrainians, although I have heard that those videos are out there, and I am looking as diligently as possible to find them and show them on stream. But with that, here's the video of the Ukrainian artillery firing at the Russians.
Огонь!
And with that, an incredibly nice video, and hopefully that artillery shell is on its way to inflict some serious damage on a Russian armored unit, or a Russian infantry unit. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we've seen the Ukrainians using a ZSU23 gun on a flatbed truck. Now, this is some Syrian war stuff here, but it is still very interesting to see that the Ukrainians are starting to use some incredibly cheap weaponry, because this is, of course, not the best weaponry that any military can field, but we are seeing it apparently being used against infantry, which is a pretty solid way of using an autocannon, much like this one. And so let's see this video.
Ну что, поехали хуярить фашиков русских. Торта, блядь.
I like how this guy comes walking out of the orchard. Let's look at that again. He just comes walking out of the orchard with the gun firing right off to his right. He's just like, you know, it's just another day. Just coming out here, making sure that the cherries are ripening. Look at this. I get a good kick out of that. And you can also see the recoil of the gun itself. We won't replay the video again, but you could actually see it rocking the truck a little bit backwards in a way, because the recoil is pretty fierce from a ZSU23 gun. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we've seen a Ukrainian Smerch firing. Of course, I have to mute this video because it does have copyrighted music in it, but still, it is a nice video to see that the Ukrainians are using some incredibly heavy MLRS systems, much like the Russians are, and hopefully to great effect. So here's the slow motion video of this Ukrainian Smerch firing. As we can see, the first rocket is on its way. It's very weird to me to watch a video of a Smerch firing, and one question I have as a layman who's not exactly an expert on the MLRS systems is, how does the backblast from these rockets shoot into the tubes of the other missiles, you know, that are currently stowed inside of their tubes, and not cause some kind of failure or some kind of overheating of the other missiles? I'm sure that the actual duration of the heat that's inflicted on the other missiles during, well, rockets during the launch is incredibly small, but it's still something interesting to me, and I would like to know how that actually works scientifically in a way, and how the other rockets do not have some kind of cook-off or something from the short-term amount of heat they're put under. But with that, we can still see that the Smerch is firing its rockets. And with that, that's the end of the video. Still incredibly interesting to see, and I do think it's a very interesting system, the Smerch, although we have seen that logistically it's highly inefficient, because it actually requires a whole 2 additional vehicles on top of the actual MLRS system itself to reload the Smerch each time it's done firing. It involves a vehicle with a crane, well, actually on the same chassis as this Smerch in particular, but it involves a vehicle with a crane on it, and then it also involves an additional vehicle on the exact same chassis as this one that carries all of the rockets for the crane vehicle to then pick up and then insert into the tubes on this MLRS. So an incredibly convoluted system to resupply and rearm, but still an incredibly effective system with the amount of firepower it can deliver to the front. So there are some pros and cons to this system from what we've been able to see over 71 days of this war. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see more Ka-52 footage has been published by the Russians, apparently on the 5th of May, although we don't know exactly where this was filmed. And so with that, here's the video. We can now see a Ka-52 taking off, and we can see the second one also taking off. They're now flying off into the distance. And now it looks like we are on the cam under the fuselage as the rockets are being fired. We're now seeing some night vision footage, apparently. Well, maybe infrared footage, most likely, of the Ka-52s operating. It does appear that the Ka-52 has fired some kind of guided missile of a sort. Not particularly sure what kind. I'm not an expert on that. But we can see that the missile is being guided towards its target, and apparently may have hit it. Although we can't really tell for certain. The footage is very grainy. With that, we're now seeing the Ka-52s return, and now land back at their base. Of course, unfortunately, we're not really sure where this base is, but hopefully the Ukrainians have some kind of idea of where it is, and can hopefully strike it if it is within Ukrainian territory, or within range of their artillery batteries. With that, there's not really much to comment on in that video. It's just, once again, more footage and more examples of the Ka-52s operating in Ukraine, and it does appear that during the night, they can get a little bit of extra altitude. I'm not really sure if the whole reason they're staying incredibly low to the ground during daytime is to try and keep out of sight of man-pads. That may be the only reason that they stay treetop level during the day, because at night, during this footage, it actually appears that they were much higher in altitude than treetop level, because they had to look down in considerable ways to see the treetops. So with that, very interesting bit of film. We can see a little bit of a change of tactics during nighttime raids by Russian helicopters, and we may be able to see that exact same trend with Ukrainian helicopters as well, if we were able to get nighttime footage of their operations. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see another picture of another butcher of Bucha. That's an incredibly hard thing to say. It's something of a tongue twister. But here is one of the Bucha butchers. Bucha butchers. Sorry for the mispronunciation there. But you can see him here with a massive cord on. I've never seen a cord that big before. And also what's crazy is that this guy actually spray painted onto the wall his Instagram account name. That's his Instagram account. And so you can actually pull it up and find it. Now, this is insane to me that someone would pretty much like dox themselves in the middle of a war, because now everyone knows this guy, knows probably a decent amount of his personal information based off of his pictures, but hopefully that will help the Ukrainians track this guy down and maybe find him in Russia after the war or on the front lines right now and bring some swift justice to him in a way. So it's a good thing to see that he did dox himself, and I gotta say, what a stupid guy to do something that dumb. He knows that people are going to go and find his Instagram, and now they have. And with that, we're now going to move on to the last 2 bits of location unknown news before we actually move into Russia itself. And here we can see a Russian tank being hit by an anti-tank guided missile. This was actually one of the other clips that we saw today during the short clip, which I actually condensed into one video. I hope a lot of people did enjoy that. But we can see here that the caption says it's an in-law strike on a Russian tank, but we didn't actually see the launcher in the video, so I excluded that from my description, and all we know is that some kind of anti-tank weapon system, anti-tank guided missile hit the side of this T72B3 and caused it to be destroyed. So here's that video. The ATGM comes in from the right side of the screen and hits the tank dead on the side, causing it to pretty much be destroyed, and it looks like it's already in the process of brewing up. We don't know if the crew was able to get out of that tank, but it was a direct hit to the side right under the turret, which usually means that at least 2 crew members have been severely wounded or killed, and those are the 2 that are inside of the turret. There's a 3rd crewman in most Russian tanks that is the driver, and he's actually in the front of the tank in the lower part that's not the turret. For those of y'all who don't really know a lot about tanks, that's actually called the hull. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of location unknown news, where we can see something hilarious and funny. So check this out, y'all. Y'all aren't going to believe this. I didn't believe it either, but you can't make this up. The Russians got a BTR60, and they were using it for a propaganda film. Of course, it's somewhere safe where they weren't on the front lines. And so they were driving it through a field, and what they did not know is that there was a mine in this field, and they actually drove over it and blew it up in the middle of trying to make one of the propaganda films. So here's the video of this, and I can't believe it. We're actually going to watch this a couple of times because it's just hilarious. So here's the video. So you can see the tank being driven through the field really slowly for the video, and then the mine blows up right into the tank. You can't make up this kind of incompetence. They didn't even check the field before they drove the tank. They just, yeah, this is a good field. We're going to drive it through here. And then they ran it over a mine and destroyed it. Probably killed a few of the crew. And although a few of the crew have been killed, and it is kind of morbid to laugh at, you just have to laugh at the stupidity and the incompetence of the Russians, because for them to do something as stupid as this, even doing it behind the lines in an attempt to film some kind of propaganda video, just tells you how incompetent they are all around. So here we go again. We're going to watch this one more time. Let me see if I can put this on a different playback speed. Can I? Because you can actually see the guys on the top of the tank realize that they're in trouble. Yikes. I can't do that, but I can maybe. Nope, can't do that. We're just going to watch it again at full speed, sadly, but here we go. That must have been a shock. Anyways, I gotta say, that's not really a good look for your propaganda films. I think they actually probably didn't learn anything from this, much like the quote, the famous quote from the Seinfeld show, "No hugging, no learning," and the Russians take that literally, and there is no hugging or no learning in the Russian military. They continue to do the same things over and over, and we've seen that they've even added something new and stupid to do in their repertoire, which is to actually run over mines behind the front lines and end up destroying your vehicles regardless of where it's being filmed. So we're going to watch this one more time because it's funny to watch. So we're going to see this one more time before we move on into Russia itself. You can't make that stuff up. That's some stuff from some kind of silly cartoon. You know, if it was a cartoon, they're going to be walking away from the tank with their faces covered in like smut or something like that. So with that, that's the end of the location unknown news. I wanted to end it off on a funny note tonight because usually it's ended off on either a good note or a bad note. I just wanted that to be a little bit of comical relief, although it is a little bit morbid in a way. So sorry if it was a little bit morbid for some people, but with that, we're now going to move into Russia, where we've seen once again, and I have to show this constantly because Russian TV It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I don't see a lot of this stuff happening here in the West, and it makes CNN and Fox News look incredibly tame. And so with that, we're going to check this video out, and I'm just going to let y'all see what they say. I think that the captions may be cut off at the bottom of the video because I have the bottom taskbar on my screen where it's cut off from y'all's view. And I know that a lot of people say that I can hide that, and I have before, but it actually stops me from doing a lot of normal things that I usually do during the stream, sometimes hopping over to the other monitor and stuff like that. So I haven't figured that out yet, so I'm sorry about that, but I will read off the captions if y'all cannot see them. So I'm going to put this up on the screen, and we're going to play. And if y'all cannot see, which I'll be able to see, the captions here, I will explain what they're saying. And so with that, here's the video.
Формат продемонстрировали. Не просто так мы всему миру его показали. Мы показали к тому, что все решения приняты и мы готовы. Возможен вполне удар тактическим ядерным вооружением. Я в этом...
Y'all cannot see it. So we're going to go back real quick, and I'm going to read it off. Unfortunately, I won't be able to let y'all hear the audio because I have to try and translate this as fast as possible. But this guy says, we demonstrated the Sarmat, which is a ballistic missile. There was a reason we showed it to the whole world because all decisions have been made and we're ready. A tactical nuclear strike is very possible. I don't even doubt it. A tactical nuclear strike. And then someone says that is the very last argument and no one will step in to defend Ukraine. No matter what kind of weapons are used there, they're afraid of tactical nuclear weapons. And I'm certain that our armed forces are capable of achieving all the goals set before them. And this is actually a counter from another guy here. Without using such things. Capable of destroying an entire planet. God willing, no need for that. It's all right that you're scaring foreigners, but you're scaring our people, citizens of Russia. And then he said, we're not scaring our people. We have a system that can intercept hypersonics, so everything will be fine. Let me make sure I said that correctly. Almost like the captions. But our oil depot and military units in Belgorod are being hit nearly every day, as well as the Kursk region, so we're not intercepting everything. That's very interesting. We actually heard this guy in the blue suit here. We're going to call him Mr. Blue Suit, or Mr. Blue, right here. Who's the nut? Then we saw Mr. Black Suit actually countering him and actually giving examples of Russian failures on TV, which is incredibly interesting, and that's actually a change from the norm. Usually we see the Russian TV personalities, if you want to call them personalities, usually they're speaking entirely pro-Russian stuff, and very extreme stuff at that, like nuking the West or attacking another country like Poland or the Baltic states as a whole, or Finland. And now we can see that one guy on TV is actually trying to, I guess, be the voice of reason for the Russians and actually say you're scaring people. And I guess making this guy look like a nut so that way maybe they can drive up their ratings on the show. I'm not really sure what the point of this is, but this guy, much like most people on Russian TV, is a raving lunatic as usual. And so with that, there's another glimpse of what's happening on Russian TV as of today, and this has been happening pretty much during the entirety of the war. So that gives you an idea of how crazy the Russian TV personalities are, and that also gives you an idea of how far the Russian government is allowing them to go, considering that all Russian state TV is pretty much run by the Russian government and allowed to say things and allowed to not say others. And so with that, we're now going to move on out of Russia, and we're now going to move back towards the Kharkiv and Donbass area. But before we do, we're going to take a quick pause for a second from the news, and we're going to recognize 3 super chats and also answer their questions. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
So good afternoon, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt once again, and we do have our questions here. So I'm just stalling so that way my computer speeds up. There we go. We have a $70 donation from a longtime channel supporter, Chris Mack, who says, "Hi, Enforcer, and much appreciated mods. Honoring Day 70 of the Ukrainian defense, Slava Ukraine. Keep up the great work, and yes, please have a waiting room as I miss the anthem at times. Leaf Spring Army lives."
Well, thank you very much for the support, Chris. You've been around for an incredibly long time. And while I do like the waiting room, one thing I did notice is that a lot of our viewers didn't really have a lot of patience, and they'd actually leave before the anthem would play and the stream would start. On top of that, I've heard that a lot of people after the stream would get on there and try and watch it, but then they'd sit there and just see the stream starting soon card for like 2 minutes and then they'd leave. And so I'm trying to make sure that a lot of people, if they click on the stream afterwards, can see it just like everyone else is seeing it right now. So I do thank you very much for the support. I may think about doing like a 1 to 2 minute waiting room instead of just going immediately, but I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. I thank you so much for the support of this channel, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $18 donation from Junebug72 who says, "Hello, and I hope you are as well as you can be. Here's to another wonderful stream, and Slava Ukraine. Prayers for all the injured, fallen, stolen, and displaced. Thank you, the Enforcer and Matt."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I am glad, Junebug, that you are enjoying these streams and willing to help us keep on doing them. You've been here for an incredibly long time, and of course, help us out a great deal. So thank you so much once again, and we will make sure to try and carry this on as best as possible. And also to answer your question, things have been going pretty good. It's always very busy running these streams. I hope a lot of people do understand that it is a tough job actually running these streams. It takes a lot of time, but I have a whole bunch of fun doing it actually, and I really do enjoy trying to deliver the best news possible to y'all. And so with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the Kharkiv and Donbass news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And the last one of the segment goes to Dad Good, who puts in an $8 donation and says, "Enforcer, also known as General Leafspring, should the defenders of Mariupol surrender and possibly save civilians and themselves, or hold on and deny Russia a complete victory?"
They should not surrender. Surrender is practically death for them at this point. We've heard a lot of reports of Russians executing prisoners, and there has been a decent amount of evidence to back that up, although I haven't shown it on stream because I don't want to send out things that could be somewhat questionable, considering that some of it doesn't have video evidence behind it. But we have seen that that soldiers and civilians are executed once they surrender sometimes. So I would not suggest that the Azov soldiers surrender along with the civilians, because then they'll be all at the mercy of the Russians. And we know that the Russians have been killing civilians without regard, and so that would be putting those civilians in jeopardy anyways, but much earlier on. And it'll also be putting the soldiers in jeopardy as well without actually doing anything meaningful. So I don't believe they should surrender, and I hope that does answer the question. And I thank you very much for the support. And with that, that is the end of this question segment, and we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv and Donbass news, and we're going to cover the northern area of the Donbass, which will include Luhansk and Kramatorsk, and then we will once again take 3 more questions from the chat just for a quick pause, and then we'll continue on with the Southern Front news and wrap up tonight's stream. Starting off in the Kharkiv area, we of course have some sad news, a little bit of unfortunate news, and we have seen that some Ukrainian tanks have been destroyed in the area. So I'm going to let y'all see the video. The caption says these Russian soldiers were supposedly from the Unit Z, but I don't think the caption understands that that's just the normal identifier for most Russian vehicles in the Ukrainian front. So the caption isn't really accurate, but with that, here's the video. As we can see here, the drone is focusing on this Ukrainian unit moving around. You can see that one of the tanks here where my mouse cursor is circling. We can now see the drone zooming in on another road where it appears that there is another Ukrainian tank right there. And we can now see that it has been hit. The tank is now sitting there. I'm not really sure how badly damaged it is, but it did look like a very solid hit that may have knocked that tank out entirely. And unfortunately may have taken the crew with it, as we haven't seen anyone bailing out of the tank yet. So with that, that is the end of that video. It's of course unfortunate to see Ukrainian units getting hit, but it is of course a rare occasion as far as we've been able to tell, and according to the casualty reports, it is an actual rare occasion by and large. And so it's unfortunate to see that these Ukrainian tankers may have been killed, but they do have the honor of fighting for their country and helping to hold the Russians back for 71 days in a war that was only supposed to last 3. And so with that, we're now going to move further on down the front line, where we have gotten massive news. Huge news, as a matter of fact, and that's why the thumbnail says what it says, and that's also why the title says what it says. And a lot of y'all are probably wondering, what is this massive news? The Russians, of course, have a small number of high-tech weaponry. This includes the T-14 Armata, the Su-57, and also a new pretty new tank, actually. Let me show it to y'all. The T-90M. The T-90 has been around for quite some while, specifically the T-90A model. But as we can see here, they've actually been doing a little bit of upgrades to the T90 as a whole, and they have now come up with a new model called the T90M. The T90M is trying to integrate the very best of Russian armor and also Russian firepower to produce the most protected tank and also the heaviest hitting tank in the Russian arsenal. This is another modernization project that the Russians have tried to undertake. I'll actually go to the picture that I got for the thumbnail right here. And this is another modernization project that the Russians have been trying to undertake to modernize their aging tank force, which is mostly from the 70s. And it looks impressive. This tank actually uses a very new explosive reactive armor called Relict armor, which is supposedly better than Contact 5. And if y'all know what I'm talking about, y'all get the gist that this is supposedly supposed to be better, although we actually don't have any kind of figures to get an idea of how much better it really is. I'm not even sure how many of these the Russians have. T90M numbers. And let's see how many they supposedly say there are. So we're going to go through Wikipedia because, of course, Wikipedia is an incredibly reliable source. Let's see. Estimated protection levels. We can see the T90M supposedly has... not good. It doesn't really look like it's all that great. It looks like it's actually worse than Contact 5, which is interesting to me. But we're going to go down here, and we're going to try and see... They have 38 T90M tanks. For y'all to know, the Russians supposedly have 12,000 tanks on paper. Out of those 12,000 tanks, we assume that around 3,000 to 4,000 of those are actually operational and can be used. Out of those 3,000 to 4,000 tanks that can supposedly be used, only 38 of them are T90Ms. So this is kind of giving you the picture that T90Ms are actually an incredibly rare tank, something that the Russians covet highly and must be expensive to produce considering that there's such a small amount of them, and they're also used in the Victory Day Parade. Now that is something that I really want to touch on. They only have 38 of these. I don't really know how big their T90 exhibition is during their military parade. It is usually sizable. And so I don't know if that losing T90Ms will actually have a direct impact on what we see during the Victory Day Parade this year. But that is one of the most advanced tanks that the Russians are able to field in combat right now. The T-14 Armada is out of the picture. All 14 of those tanks are pre-production models that are still in testing, and so those will never be used most likely unless if the Russians are extremely desperate. So this is actually the best tank in the Russian arsenal. And we got news that once it hit the front lines, it got destroyed. And we actually have a picture to prove it. Here is a picture of a destroyed T90M near the front. You can see it right behind the guy, and you can see the exact same turret configuration with the explosive reactive armor around the sides that is on this T90M, which tells us that that is the first T90M, the best tank in the Russian army that can actually be used, that was destroyed on the front today. Now that is something. The Ukrainians are literally obliterating every single Russian tank, regardless of how good it is, and now the argument is completely moot about the Russians are going to send in better equipment. That is literally the best thing they could send in, and we've already seen one of them become a smoldering mess on some backwoods country road. So, just saying, doesn't really look like things are going all too well for the Russians. I bet a lot of y'all could probably agree with that, and it looks like the Russians are kind of out of options at this point. They don't really have anything better to commit to this, and I just don't really see it becoming better for them. With that, we've also gotten more news in the area that the Ukrainians have now entirely liberated the town of Ruska Lozova, which is north of Kharkiv. I'm going to let y'all see this video in its entirety. Hopefully it doesn't have copyright music. I can't exactly remember. It does. So I'm going to mute that real quick. And we now see the Ukrainians preparing for the attack on the village. So we can now see them preparing. We could also see, now like this, a 50 cal, an M2HB, I believe, if I'm correct. That's the actual proper designation for that 50 caliber gun. But I have actually shot one of those in real life, and I have to say, you wouldn't believe it, but the recoil well, not really the recoil from the gun. You can't really feel the recoil because usually it's mounted on some kind of stand. But the actual shockwave of the gun firing is actually really intense. It actually makes it feel like your nose is like almost shaking off your skull. It's an incredibly awesome gun to shoot, and it's just a very neat gun. I highly like it. It's a very cool one. And we can now see that the Ukrainians actually have one, which does tell us that American supplies are making it to the front. I don't believe they had a large amount of those starting off at the beginning of the war, if they had any at all. We can now see the Ukrainians using a large amount of trucks. We can also see that they spray painted the Nissan logos on them, which is always a good tactic. You don't want that shiny Nissan logo giving you away. And we can now see them getting down on the side of the road. Let me see if there's copyright music. There is. I'm sorry about that, y'all. But we can now see them engaged in a firefight around the trucks, firing around them in the direction of the tree line on the other side of this road. And they are laying into them. One thing I would like to note is that the spacing is poor here, and I don't know if that's because in a realistic situation, spacing is something that's really hard to do or not, because now we've actually seen both sides with poor spacing in a large amount of videos. So I think spacing may just be something on paper, actually, and something that isn't actually implemented in real life, perhaps, in actual combat situations. But we can now see them moving up a berm on the side of the road. It appears in a different location, and they're now setting up to what appears to actually fire towards the other side of the road. So I believe they're just getting on the berm to get a better view. We can now see some wounded Ukrainians here, and they're tending to him with medical supplies. We can also see another guy here. I'm not really sure what was wrong with him, but he was grasping his neck. And now we can see the truck speeding away with some Ukrainian soldiers in the back of them. We can also see them trying to move around some kind of checkpoint. And now we can see a fire burning. And now a civilian car taking a right turn down a dirt path in this village. I'm not really sure what this last bit was, but still, it was a very interesting video of the Ukrainians in action and fighting to defend their country. And I have to say, it is, of course, wonderful news to hear that they have confirmed that they've retaken the town of Lazova north of Kharkiv right here. So that is once again a Ukrainian victory, which has also been accompanied by the massive success and the collapse of the Russian front east of Kharkiv, where the Ukrainians managed to push the Russians all the way back to Stary Saltiv, and also managed to capture that city intact. So that's, of course, incredibly good news, and now they are in somewhat halfway control of the Stary Saltiv Dam, which they may use to cross over and then push further across this large reservoir, which extends almost all the way from Chuhuiv to the Russian border itself. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten from the Kharkiv area, where we can see a Russian soldier filming his own unit's destruction. I don't know how this made it through the sensors and out to the public, but it did actually make it through, and we can see that this Russian unit in particular has suffered some severe losses here, as multiple vehicles are seen burning in a very small area in this film. And so with that, here's the video. We can see him panning around, and you can actually hear an artillery shell come in and explode right over him in this video. We can now see a better view of the damage that's been caused to this Russian unit. T72B burning over there on the side. That may actually be a T64BV. And if we go back real quick, we can see even more burning vehicles out in the distance, and we can also see here to the right side of the screen what appears to be a BTR82, perhaps? I'm not entirely sure, but it is brewing up and burning, and we can also see the clear Z mark on the vehicle, which does confirm that it is a Russian vehicle. So this Russian has actually given us a better insight than we've seen in a while on the amount of destruction that's been wreaked on a single Russian unit. And here in this video, it's been incredibly high, and it looks honestly like something straight out of Kursk from World War II with how this battlefield looks. And it is good to know that the Ukrainians are inflicting that amount of damage on Russian units that you can actually make it look like it's some kind of apocalyptic battlefield in the middle of nowhere. Of course, that's nothing more than a qualitative observation, what I made, but still, we have seen more Russian vehicles get destroyed, more units wiped out, and that is, of course, going to help the Ukrainians in their struggle to hold the land they currently have, and also push the Russians back, as they've been doing across the entirety of the front lines. with that, we've actually covered all of the Kharkiv news. We're now going to talk in brief about this large bulge that has been made in the Russian-Ukrainian lines that is now extended all the way to the Donets River, pretty much on its entirety from Pechny to Stary Saltiv, and it looks like the Ukrainians are in an incredibly good position to defend the eastern side of Kharkiv, considering that the Russians can't exactly just swim over the Donets, considering it's so wide, and then attack the Ukrainian forces on the other side of the river. So I believe that this front line will not change for quite some while. We're going to see that stay the way it is for most likely the duration of this war. Now what we're going to see is how this northern area, north and somewhat northeast of Kharkiv, holds up during the next few weeks. It already looks like the Russians have lost some land up in the north. We've already seen the Ukrainians manage to recapture Ruska Lazova, which is telling us that they are making some kind of ground, although we don't know by how much. But that may suggest that the Russian lines are doing incredibly poorly, like they were on the eastern side of the city, and that a breakthrough may be achieved here within the next week, and that the Ukrainians may start covering untold amounts of ground, some 10 miles a day, like they did in this direction of Stary Saltiv, and reach the Russian border. Although I believe that's being a little too optimistic. I think the best thing we'll see is them slowly get pushed back to Pytomyk. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. Sorry for the butchering of the pronunciation. But I think that would be a much more realistic idea of a counterattack and its success over the next week or so. With that, we're now going to move further down the line to the Izium area, where I do have to make a note that there has been no action in terms of video evidence as far as we can see today. That does not mean that that front is quiet. It is currently an active front. There has been a large amount of fighting there in between the Russian BTGs and also the Ukrainian ones as well. So we are trying to keep an eye on that as best as possible. But of course, if we don't get any news from an area, we sadly cannot report on its position or its actual state. So we're now going to move further on down the front, and we're now going to move into the area of Lysychansk, where I'm going to start off with a little bit of a add-on to the news about the poor Ukrainian nurse who managed to lose both of her legs and most of the fingers on one hand due to a mine exploding near her. We have gotten a little bit more news on her today, and we have heard, once again, that she lost both of her legs and all of the fingers except for one on one hand, and she actually got married during treatment. So this is a better view of who this nurse is, and I have to say, I wish her the best of luck. What's happened to her is one of the most unfortunate things that can happen, and we can actually see the couple here, and I have to say, that is something terrible that she's had to go through because of this war. This poor woman was probably just expecting a very normal life, being a nurse, doing great work for the patients that were inside of her hospital and trying to take care of people because she probably has an incredibly large heart. And now she's had to suffer something as terrible as being a double amputee and losing all the fingers on one of her hands. Of course, the great news out of all of this is that the love of her life still loves her and that they will remain a couple. But of course, it's probably going to be a very hard road ahead for this poor girl and also the man she's now with. And so I wish them the best of luck. And I hate to see that terrible things like this happen during war. And this should remind everyone what you're going up against when facing the Russians. The Russians are totally fine with inflicting harm and death upon civilians like this poor girl here that are just trying to go about their daily lives and are getting wounded or killed. So just keep that in mind and remember this girl whenever you're thinking that the Russian military may actually have a soft side to them. They do not. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from the Severodonetsk area, where we can actually see a video of a Luhansk People's Republic T72B in action. This is actually a bit of a rarer video. Usually we only see tank action from the pro-Russian forces, but here we can actually see a video made by the LPR, apparently. So I'm going to let y'all see this video. It's a very interesting insight into how the LPR is operating their tanks. We can now see them reloading the tank stores, making sure that it has enough ammo to operate. We can now see them loading a shell and the propellant into the autoloader. And now that goes down into the carousel, but you can actually see the carousel in action here. This is something I believe is important to show. In Western tanks, the ammo is actually, well, like the M1 Abrams, the ammo is actually stored in the rear of the turret, and you actually have a guy in there whose job is to load the gun. So he'll grab the charge, and he'll load it into the barrel. Russian tanks, however, have cut the loader out of the equation. So most Russian tanks, I believe all of them at this point, are manned by 3 people, There's a driver, a commander, and a gunner, and the loader has been replaced by this system, which is called an autoloader. The autoloader in a Russian tank works off of a carousel system, where at the bottom of the turret basket, which is the kind of like cylindrical shaped area inside of the tank where the turret crew is and the turret is above it, there's this massive carousel on the floor of ammunition, and it's literally shaped like a carousel. The ammo is all facing inwards in this massive circle, and this massive disc down there that holds all of this ammo will spin around with the charge and the shell in it. It will then be lifted up by a mechanical arm and then loaded into the breech of the gun. So this is a very interesting insight on how a carousel actually works, and this is one of the few times that I've actually seen it on video. With that, we can now see him resetting the gun to be reloaded again. Well, the carousel to be reloaded again. And we can now see the tank firing. You can now see inside the turret how the propellant is actually loaded. You can see a mechanical arm there pushing the shell in first. On the bottom of the autoloader right here, you see it being pushed in, and then the autoloader lowers down the top tray and then shoves in the propellant behind it. Now we can see the gun firing again. Now we can see a T72B3 in the distance, apparently operated by the LPR, now advancing through the field and firing as well. We now see it firing again. Of course, this is most likely staged, but it's still an interesting insight on how a Russian tank works. Also, what's really interesting about Russian tanks is that there is a little piece of the propellant that's left over. It's the casing of the actual propellant. And so it has to be ejected out of the breech and then somewhere out of the vehicle. And this is something that you can kind of see here and also in the prior parts of the video, which I will show. The little casing that's left actually gets pushed out of the breech back into the auto-loading system, and then the auto-loader will eject this piece of the casing out of the rear of the turret, and a small little door will open to allow that to happen. You can actually see that here in the clip after the tank fires. I'll try and circle it with my mouse. When the tank fires, this little door opens, and it actually ejects the little propellant casing out of the rear of the turret. You can see it right here. And then the tank reloads the next round. Also, what you can see, which is incredibly interesting, is that when this gun fires, and I have not seen this a lot in Western tanks, is that it appears that the ventilation in T72 series tanks, or specifically just this one instance, is incredibly poor, because you can see when the breech opens, it becomes nearly a hotbox down in that tank as the smoke from the propellant's charge is just billowing out of the turret's open cupolas. So I'm going to let y'all see that. You can see it over here on the left side of the screen. And so that may suggest that the ventilation inside of a T-72's turret may be poor. Also, notice the little smiley face over here. That's something interesting. And so that's the end of the video. Once again, you can see the hotbox being formed in there by the poor ventilation of the turret or the poor ventilation of the breech. Supposedly, because I have watched videos of M1 Abrams operating from inside the turret, and you don't see that amount of smoke being expelled from the breech after firing, and that's because there's this little thing, and this is getting it really into nerd talk on tanks, but I hope y'all do like this because it is interesting stuff. There is this piece on the barrel, you can see it on this tank, called a barrel evacuator, and it's actually the part of the barrel that's larger. I'll show y'all what this looks like on an M1A2 Abrams real quick. And you can actually see it right there. It's this massive bulge on the barrel. And the barrel evacuator's entire purpose is to make the pressure inside of the barrel, I guess you could say, unstable. I guess you could say uneven with the air pressure outside of the barrel, and so it actually pushes all of that smoke out of the barrel. And so that's whenever you see videos of an M1 Abrams firing, the gun will fire, the barrel will lift up for reloading, and you'll also see all of that smoke still coming out of the front of the barrel. And that's because the barrel evacuator is changing pretty much like the air pressure inside of the barrel and leading to that smoke being expelled. But here on this T72, we're not really seeing the same thing. We're seeing most of the smoke actually going back into the turret, it seems, because it's just flowing out of the turret like it is out of the front of the gun. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from the Luhansk region, because I know that I probably talked way too much about the specific details of how a T-72 operates. Sorry about that. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit, where we can see that a Mysta SPG has been destroyed in the Luhansk area. So I'm going to let y'all see this. It is, of course, cool to see. Mistas are, of course, the pride of the Russian self-propelled gun force, and we can see another one being destroyed here. That is the Mista right there in the clip, and you can now see it get blown up. Of course, it was an incredibly short video, but it was a very good one nonetheless, because the loss of that Mista is another Mista that most likely will not make it to a Victory Day parade. Speaking of which, how many Mistas do the Russians have? Mysta S numbers. So there's the Mista. It was actually produced during Soviet times a little bit, mostly near the end. That's why you can actually see a few of them way back in the day that actually had some Soviet identifier markings on them. But let's take a look and see the actual numbers here. Russia, approximately 760 in service and 270 in storage. It's very interesting. They actually have a really high number of these SPGs, but still, they are considered the pride of the Russian SPG force, and we have seen a large amount of them being destroyed. They're also built on top of the T-72 chassis, and it's really just a massive turret that's been tacked on top. Well, that turret has paper-thin armor, and it's very easy to breach it and cause an ammo detonation, which, like we saw in that video. And so with that, we're now going to move on down to the Donbass, the rest of the Donbass, specifically Donetsk. But before we do, we're actually going to cover the last bit of news in Kramatorsk, which seems to be an eerie resemblance of what happened a very long time ago, with one of the most unfortunate tragedies that I have ever seen during this war, and the worst one I ever saw on video. I saw some terrible stuff when this attack occurred in Kramatorsk weeks ago, which was on the railway station. That was the first time I'd ever actually seen a small kid. He looked like he was 8 or 9 years old, and his head had been entirely cut in two, and where his brain was nothing more than a bowl where there was nothing, and his head had just been entirely split in two by a piece of shrapnel. That was the first time I'd ever seen that, and that's left a lasting impression on me. I remember that often now because it was really scarring to look at, honestly, and I hope that most of y'all didn't see that, because that was very rough and very sad to see. And there was a whole bunch of videos and pictures and footage that came out of Kramatorsk from that attack like that, and that was really one of the turning points where I really lost all hope for the Russians as well, because the sickness of actually seeing the actual destruction to a human body from a Russian attack at that point, because it was so gruesome. I had never seen anything that gruesome at that point yet during this war, rather than that. And to see it happening to kids was really the point where I said the Russian military and the government are an irreparable group, and they need to face the harshest thing that could ever happen to them. Anyways, now with all that out of the way, we've seen that another large explosion has occurred in the center of Kramatorsk. We're not exactly sure where, why, or if there have been any casualties, but of course, with a couple of weeks ago, the Kramatorsk railway station attack in mind, I don't really have a lot of optimistic ideas about what may be happening again in Kramatorsk. With that, here's the video.
Держись. Саня, ты присядь, блядь. Волна пойдет. Скорее всего.
So you can see the explosion in the distance.
Я ебало завалил, блядь. Держишься?
Я-то держусь, чтобы в голову ничего не прилетело.
Все в порядке, спасибо зарядки.
And with that, that's the end of that video. Of course, I don't have high hopes for what's happened in Kramatorsk from that explosion. Of course, weeks ago, I got a lasting impression of what an actual missile attack entails from the Russians. It's not just a quick death for some people, I also remember speaking a little bit more about what I saw. Maybe some of y'all didn't see it, and I pray that y'all did not. I also saw one video where a woman had her leg nearly blown off and it was nothing more than little shreds. And she was on that railway platform and she just stared at it in shock, and then she started screaming out to other people. And that was another thing that I saw. And you never really think about that stuff. You usually think when a missile attack occurs and it hits, most people are just lights out and they just get killed immediately. You don't ever think that some people will live for a short while with the amount of trauma that's been inflicted on them and actually have to suffer through that pain and live through the shock of knowing that they are going to die and that they had nothing to do with the war going on elsewhere. These were entirely civilians just trying to get out of that city, and they got slaughtered for nothing, for no reason. They weren't defending Ukraine. They weren't fighting on the front lines. There was no military units there. And then the Russians just killed them deliberately with that ballistic missile attack directly targeted at that railway station. And so, of course, I don't have a lot of hope for what happened here in the Kramatorsk attack that's occurred just today, and I will be looking for news to see what exactly happened and if there were any unfortunate civilian casualties. And if there were, I wouldn't doubt it. And, of course, it wouldn't be much of a shock to me. The Russians are pretty much animals with how they treat civilians and how they target civilians directly. And so with that, we've now covered the northern Donbass as well as the Kharkiv news. So before we move on to the rest of the Donbass, Donetsk, and then we move on to the southern front, which will include Mariupol and the little bit of news we've gotten south of Zaporizhia, we're going to take another 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to move on to the rest of the news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and up next we have a $75 donation from Sylvester the Cat, who says, "What do you think Russia will do on May the 9th? Also, what is the pink area on your map west of Mariupol?"
So to answer the last part of that question first, this little pink area is supposed partisan activity. We can't really get any confirmation a lot to confirm that, and so it's an actual filled-in area because we're not really sure if it's Russian-controlled or partisan-controlled, although we've heard both over the recent while. Also, will the Ukrainians do anything to Moscow on May 9th? Most likely not. A ballistic missile would have to fly over an incredibly long amount of territory to reach Russia, well, to reach Moscow specifically. And so I don't believe it'd be a possibility. Most likely air defenses will be ramped up around Moscow during May 9th to make sure that something like that doesn't happen. But still, of course, anything can happen. There could be some kind of bomb planted at the parade grounds that explodes and kills multiple people. You never know. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I do hope I answered those questions in brief pretty well there. And so I thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just have to say thank you very much, Sylvester. You've been around for a little while now, and thank you for your generous support. And also thank you again to Chris Mack for his generous support as well. Both of you have been a tremendous source of support to the channel. We appreciate it very much. Up next, we have a $50 donation from Jay Bridenbeer, who says, "Greatly appreciate all of your effort. What difference do you think the U.S. satellite data / intel is making? Keep up the great work."
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question, the U.S. satellite intel is giving a lot of information on Russian positions, more so than any other form of surveillance, I guess you could say. The reason why is, of course, because satellites are continuously doing orbits. I believe that an orbit is achieved usually every 15 to 30 minutes by a normal satellite. And so every 15 to 30 minutes, you're getting almost live information, live updates about the situation inside of Ukraine and surrounding Ukraine by the satellites that are passing over it in an orbit. So, for example, a satellite will pass over in 15 minutes, and it will show that there's a large convoy on the E105 right here near this intersection that is heading southwards. Once it passes over in 15 minutes again, you'll see that they've made a small move. Now most of that convoy is on the intersection and passing over it. And so every 15 minutes, you're pretty much getting live information, as long as there's no cloud cover most of the time, on Russian movements and where they are and what they may be planning. And that's been giving the Ukrainians a large advantage because the United States has been feeding them satellite images that shows them what is probably about to happen. And they can tell that really easily based off of troop buildups and movements. Like, for example, at the beginning of this war, The U.S. was the one to sound the alarm by saying our satellites are showing massive troop buildups on the Ukrainian border. At that point, the Ukrainians were entirely unaware of what was about to come, and they didn't even know that the Russian military was building up on the border for the large part. They had an idea, but they didn't know by how much. And once the United States started releasing the satellite footage showing the exact camps where they all were and their sizes, the Ukrainians started to get a little bit of a better picture of what was about to happen and may have been able to prepare for it in a small way, although to be honest, they didn't really prepare for it much, and I don't believe the Ukrainian government was actually expecting an all-out war. So with that, I hope that answers the question with how important satellite information has been for the Ukrainians and how much satellite information the United States has been giving, because we also know that they were giving a large amount on the southeastern portion of the front before this renewed offensive occurred, and that may have been giving the Ukrainians an upper hand on what to expect and where to prepare for an offensive or some kind of push. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, and I believe that may have been the last question of the segment. Am I correct in assuming that, Matthew?
I think we have one more to go.
All right. And so with that, we're going to answer this last question in this segment, and then we're going to move on to the southern Donbass news, and then the rest of the southern front news, accompanied with the news of Belarus, and finally an address from the president of Ukraine. And so with that, on to the last question of this segment.
And please forgive me if I am butchering your name, but I believe it is pronounced Sergey Repesco, putting in a $20 donation and says, in case of a Russian nuclear attack on Ukraine, could NATO intercept the missile? And if so, why wouldn't they? Also, how would they know that the target is not a NATO member country?
Could you reread that one again to me? Because I think I lost it about halfway through.
So he says, in case of a Russian nuclear attack on Ukraine, could NATO intercept the missile? And if so, why wouldn't they? Also, how would they know that the target is not a NATO member country?
Well, they most likely know it's not a NATO member country because as soon as that missile was about to be fired, most likely within 5 to 10 minutes before the launch of it, or maybe when it is being launched, Russia would, of course, make some kind of official statement or some kind of, guess you could call them confidential communiques with the NATO countries telling them this isn't going towards y'all, this is going towards Ukraine. Because whenever a nuclear weapon is being used in any way during testing or actual combat, although it hasn't actually been used in actual combat, usually the country that's doing it gives a heads up to everyone else as to where it's going. Like, for example, in North Korea, whenever you hear about a nuclear missile testing occurring in the Sea of Japan, they have actually notified, most of the time, although this isn't always the case, they have usually notified the surrounding countries that we're going to do this date and it's going there. The problem with the Koreans, though, usually, is that while they'll tell people that, the countries around them do not really have a right to protest, because if they say something like, hey, I don't like that, North Koreans will be like, well, did I ask you? And then they'll still do it. So that's usually the problem with the North Koreans that causes a lot of international tensions. And also, along with the United States and Russia as well, they usually would tell each other way in advance, even when they were testing nuclear weapons on their own soil, hey, we're going to test them, just letting you know. So that's most likely what would happen with Ukraine, and that's why NATO would know that it's not targeted directly at a NATO country. Also, due to the range that one of these tactical nuclear weapons would have to cover to actually make it to Ukraine, the flight time would be incredibly short. So honestly, the reaction time by NATO would be far too short to actually respond to this missile being launched, and the only people I believe could actually respond to it would most likely be the Ukrainians themselves, and hopefully they have some kind of countermeasures to try and shoot down this missile before it can reach its target. But still, at the same time, I'm highly doubting that the Russians would actually use a tactical nuclear weapon, because that, of course, would lead to direct Western intervention in the war, and most likely a direct outright world war in the European continent again. So with that, I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we've reached the end of this question segment. We're now going to go back to the news in the Donbass region and also the Southern Front, as well as the international news and the address from President Zelensky today, and then we will return to all of the questions. So everyone hang tight who sent in a question, and we're now going to get right back into what is happening in Donetsk. Starting off, I would like to say that y'all probably have noticed that there was only 9 location unknown events, well actually 10 location unknown events to happen today. And you may be thinking, wow, what happened to make that occur less? And what has actually happened is that for the first time ever, I've stepped out of my comfort zone of only assessing my own information and what I am able to gather, and I've actually assessed someone else's map. I'm not going to say whose map it was, but this map actually details the location of every single Ukrainian unit on the front lines. So I don't really want to make it public where that map is. I don't really like that it's only broadcasting Ukrainian locations on the front lines, but still it's given me a better idea of where things are occurring for the Russians. And so with that, we're now going to move on into the news near this area. Starting off, we can see once again that Russian Ka-52s have been operating in the Donbass region, somewhere most likely in the Donetsk area. So with that, here's the video if it does load. Come on, there we go. All right, so here's the video. We can see them loading the rocket pods on the Ka-52. We can now see the Ka-52 firing, and the rockets landing in the distance. This actually looks like similar footage from earlier that was a location unknown, but it now appears that it's been tacked on to footage that was reportedly in the Donbass. And so with that, that is the end of the video. Of course, it looked very similar to the one we saw in the location unknowns. I believe it may be the same one, except for it had a little bit of additional footage at the beginning. But we can see that it's now been identified to be in the Donbass region, and so that gives us a better idea of where a heavy amount of helicopter activity has been seen, because we've seen more videos come out from the Donbass region alone, from the Luhansk and Donetsk areas of Russian helicopter activity, than we've seen anywhere else across the entirety of the front, from Kharkiv all the way to Kherson. So that is something interesting to note. It may suggest that the Russians are trying to use their helicopters in the best place possible, which may suggest that the air defenses for Ukraine are slightly weaker in the Donbass area. But that's just nothing more than an assumption. With that, we're now going to move further on, and we're now going to get to the area around Luhansk. There's a lot of stuff that kind of has similar names in Ukraine, which is interesting to me, but still, here's the videos that we've gotten from this area. First off, the 30th Mechanized Brigade was hitting Russian units in this specific area. We're going to move to Twitter real quick so that way I can show these videos without them going dark. Starting off, I'm going to have to, of course, mute the video, and we're now going to see the Ukrainians shelling a Russian trench near this area. We can see that the fire is incredibly accurate, actually hitting almost dead on inside of the trench, which is something that the Russians can't do consistently. We can now see a Russian soldier running towards this picnic basket covering. We can now see two more Russian soldiers. I don't know what they're carrying. It looks like a flour sack or something, but they're now running towards the blanket covering as well. And now we can see that specific spot get hit directly by Ukrainian artillery. We can now see the shells landing around some kind of installation. I'm not exactly sure what kind of building that is. And this fire, honestly, is a little less accurate than what we were seeing at the beginning of the video, but it is hitting around the compound. Now we can see one shell land directly onto the compound, hitting it directly. I'm not really sure if that was on the roof or the side. Couldn't exactly tell. And with that, that's the end of the video. The 30th Mechanized Brigade has been going off today on the Russian units in this specific area, as we've once again gotten more evidence of the 30th Mechanized Brigade showing how accurate they can actually be with their artillery fire. So here's another video of the 30th Mechanized Brigade destroying Russian units in the area. As we can see here, that looks to be a BTR60 or 82. I believe that these are actually both BTR82s. And we can now see a third vehicle over there near the trees in that depot. We can now see Russian soldiers walking into a shed there, and now that shed has been hit directly with a bomb. We can now see them once again hitting the same area with a bomb, most likely wiping out all the Russian units that were there. And we can now see Russian soldiers running away from their vehicles. It looks like a large amount of them are running away now from that area, and they're abandoning the BTRs where they are. So, of course, it's incredibly good to see, and I know that a lot of people like to hear that. It's incredibly good to see that the Russians are running for their lives from their vehicles again, and hopefully the Ukrainians will be able to capture these and use them for themselves, considering that the Ukrainians have a large cache of similar ammunition used for pretty much the exact same kind of vehicles. We do have the general idea that the 30th Mechanized Brigade is operating somewhere in this area, although I don't want to say exactly where, and we are seeing them inflict a heavy amount of losses and damage on the Russian units. So, of course, that's incredibly good to hear, and we're now going to move further on down the front, past Orlivka, where we've heard no news on the front near that area as of today, and we're now going to move closer to Avdiivka, where today we can see that the DPR has hit another Ukrainian tank somewhere on the front today. This one, if I remember correctly, actually has a bit of a better ending, because it looks like most of the crew, I believe all of the crew, actually managed to bail out, and it looked like none of them actually were killed in the video. So I was very happy to see that. But here we can see the Ukrainian tank moving down the tree line and looking through it. We can now see an explosive hit the rear of the tank. It looks like it may have hit a little bit low and near the engine bay. We can now see the tank is still looking out in the distance. We can now tell for sure that the cupolas have opened on the top of the tank because now smoke is billowing out. And the crew is about to bail here in a second if the camera stabilizes a bit. We can already see an infantryman or something of the sort here on the side. And now we can see one of the crew members crawl off the rear engine bay, I guess you could call it, and now he's standing near the rear of the tank. Now you're about to see a miracle happen. I don't know how this guy survives this, but the next Russian round came in and exploded directly on the tank right behind him. When the smoke clears, he's actually still down there, and he's getting up and walking a little bit. I don't know how, but he actually survived that, and I'm very happy he did. As you can see here, he's still down there, and right now it looks like he's crawling around and may be heavily wounded, but later on in the video, it did look like he got up and actually started to walk off a bit. We'll actually see the driver now bail out of the tank as well near the front. We'll see his hatch open, and then he'll climb out and run off. And he actually bails out of the gunner's hatch, apparently. That was weird. For some reason, I remembered him bailing out of the driver's hatch. But we can see him get out of the gunner's hatch. He kind of just tumbled off the tank, and now he gets up, and he's taking off. He's perfectly fine as well, which is something interesting to me there. We don't see his legs being seriously injured or his arms. And the guy who was near the rear of the tank, where the explosion occurred, is actually about to get up, and he's about to just walk off. As you can see there, he's kind of like regaining his footing. He's like, gee, man, that like took the wind out of me. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, but the turret actually repositioned itself with no one inside. We know that the commander, the driver, and the gunner have all bailed at this point, and I believe that may have been a protection system activated on the tank that has now made the turret turn, because we can now see this guy. What? Wait a minute, hang on. Hang on, wait a minute. We saw the first guy get out. Let's go through this again, because we just saw a fourth guy get out of this tank. Let's go all the way back to the start. I need to get the story straight on this. Alright. So we can see the tank looking in that direction. We can now see it getting hit. Okay, so there's someone already in that hole. Sorry, I've gotten the sequence of events wrong. There's someone already in that foxhole at the start of this video. So with that in mind, let's go all the way through the sequence of events again and see how it happened. Alright, so the hatches were opened. We can first see the commander crawl out. So this is not the gunner. This is actually the commander. We can see this Ukrainian soldier climbing out of the foxhole and moving further into the tree line now that the tank has been hit. He's now standing near the rear of the tank, and he's like, wow, this is messed up. And then the next round comes in and hits directly behind the engine bay. And surprisingly, this guy will live, and he'll actually retain the function in all of his limbs, which was something amazing to me, and that's a miracle for him. Hopefully he wasn't heavily injured or mortally wounded in a way that left him able to crawl away, but still at the same time would eventually kill him. So now we can see him sitting there. I think he's probably going through tinnitus right now because, of course, that explosion was probably incredibly loud. We can now see the gunner get out of his hatch, and he rolled off the tank, and he's now running off into the tree line as well, considering that the tank has now pretty much been knocked out. And also, just to answer someone real quick, Hoodoo Texas says he probably didn't survive it. Blast injury is somewhat of a slow motion kill. I do know that, but what was surprising to me is that explosion occurred just feet behind him, and he didn't get killed immediately. That's kind of what I'm interested in. I know he probably actually, sadly, the honest truth is he probably crawled off into the woods and died later on. But it's still amazing to me that he survived the initial blast at all, considering it was so close. We can now see the driver get out of his hatch, and now he's bailed out, and he headed in the same direction as the gunner, and it looks like the commander has now crawled into this foxhole over here near the tank. Hopefully he did survive. Of course, a blast is something pretty difficult to survive from, especially one that close. The concussive blast of it alone sometimes can mess up internal organs bad enough that you will eventually die from internal bleeding or some other cause like that. But of course, it was good to see that the crew did survive the initial 2 hits and did manage to bail out of the tank alive. So I'm happy to see that. But of course, a Ukrainian tank was knocked out there, which is unfortunate. But still, these Ukrainian soldiers are defending their country, and if the commander did die, his death is hopefully not in vain, and the Ukrainians will be able to win this war, hopefully. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news further on down the line towards the area of Marinka, where today we've seen a toss hitting a building directly in the Donetsk area. According to the caption, there was a BTR on the other side of this building, although I couldn't really see it in the footage. But we can now see the missile hit the direct side of this building. We still do not see well, now we see the BTR. It's right there. And it looks like the toss hit directly into the side of an apartment building, which is, of course, typical. Hopefully there were no civilians inside that building, but we can see that the BTR was largely okay. And it now looks like the crew's actually hopping into it to try and get it on the move. That's something different from the Russians, because the Russians would have just started running off towards the front of the tank, towards the upper left of the screen, and would have just ran off. But we can actually see the Ukrainian crew running back to their tank to try and start it up and get the thing moving. So that was good to see. It's good to see that there's a lot of bravery and valor in the Ukrainian units. And so with that, we're now going to move further on down the Donbass region, and we're now going to move to Mariupol. Of course, there was a historical betrayal that has occurred about 3 days ago, and I know that some people are saying that that did not happen and that the Azov is actually still holding their perimeter. But to start off, we're actually going to hear a report from the deputy commander of the Azovstal to start off the news in Mariupol. He can assess the situation better than everyone else because he is there in the plant. So here's the video.
Слава Україні! Уже третю добу, як ворог прорвався на територію заводу Азовсталь, де тривають важкі кровопролитні бої. Оборонці міста вже 71 день б'ються сам на сам з переважаючими силами противника. Та чорт забирай, проявляють таку витримку і героїзм, що Україна повинна знати, що означає бути вірним батьківщині. В черговий раз росіяни порушили обіцянку щодо перемир'я та не дали можливість на евакуацію цивільних осіб, які продовжують ховатися від обстрілів у підвалах заводу. Закликаю світову спільноту евакуювати цивільних та особисто звертаюсь до Верховного Головнокомандувача, щоб подбав про поранених солдат, які в страшних муках помирають від неналежного лікування. Дайте можливість забрати тіла воїнів, щоб українці могли попрощатися зі своїми героями. Відреагуйте належним чином на критичну ситуацію, в якій противник не дотримується жодних етичних норм, конвенцій та законів, знищуючи людей на очах у всього світу, керуючись вседозволеністю і безкарністю. Слава Україні!
And so with that is the end of that video. Of course, we could see from the report of the deputy commander, there is still a couple of hundred civilians left inside of the Azovstal that have not been able to be evacuated, and the Russians have also violated a ceasefire agreement. But before we move on to the news of that, we must actually lay out the groundwork for the story that's unfolded today. The Russians announced a ceasefire a while ago, and this ceasefire was intended to make sure that the civilians that are still stuck inside of the Azovstal could get out before fighting was to resume. This article pretty much just speaks of that. Right after that, we saw Russian naval forces bombard the Azovstal, right after the ceasefire was supposedly declared, and you can see this here in this video. Right after that, we can then also see later on in the day that the Russians have now been once again hitting Ukrainian positions in Mariupol with what appears to be carpet bombing. So here's the video of that. I'm sorry, correction, that would more be like one bomb. There is a bit of footage, I believe, today that is showing that the Russian forces were, well, carpet bombed the Azovstal. Let me show you all this footage. I believe that is the evidence of a carpet bombing. As we can see here, smoke is billowing out of the factory. We can see some explosions occurring inside of the smoke. Once again, another explosion. Unfortunately, I believe I may be mistaken. I think I'm getting the news mixed up with another day from the Azovstal yesterday, I believe. But we can see artillery explosions resounding all around the plant and hitting everywhere, causing smoke to billow up and causing unlivable conditions for anything above ground. And with that, you can kind of get the idea that the situation in Mariupol is, of course, worsening, and that there are still civilians stuck in there, and they're having to endure these terrible conditions. Once again, I have to say that the Russians are a pretty sick group of people, considering that they declared a ceasefire and then immediately broke it. That's something that I've never really heard of before. Is like a good analogy of that would be like doing this, as in saying, I will not drive my car, and then 1 minute later getting in your car and turning it on and driving it. That's what the Russians pretty much did there. They said, we're declaring a ceasefire. Then they immediately start bombarding the Azovstal with naval fire, and then afterwards hitting it with artillery and also a bomb later on in the day. So you can kind of get the idea, once again, that the Russians aren't really people of their word, and you can't really trust them whenever they say anything, and it looks like they're willing to kill hundreds of civilians again to just try and secure some objective of taking the Azovstal and claiming entirety of control over Mariupol. So with that, that is the end of the Mariupol news. Of course, we do not know how much longer they're going to hold. I don't actually have any high prospects for the Azovstal defenders anymore. I believe that their time may be up, considering that Russian forces are now popping up all within the perimeter of the Azovstal in small pockets, and they're now going to start dividing up the Azovstal defenders even further into smaller groups and then taking them on one by one. And they cannot win under those kinds of circumstances. This is when a castle falls during a siege, as when someone from the outside tells them of secret tunnels that will lead them inside of there. That's historically that would lead to the fall of Mariupol. And it looks like the Azovstal defenders will, of course, try and hold valiantly as long as possible. But I do hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I believe that this will be a loss for the Ukrainians within the coming week. I may be wrong, and I hope that I am proven wrong on that, but the situation there is looking poor. And so with that, I hope everyone gives their best wishes and support to the Azovstal. Of course, that doesn't really do much. Hopefully, the Ukrainians can do something to relieve the forces down there in the Azovstal, or some kind of come up with some kind of agreement that will allow the Azov defenders and the 36th Infantry Brigade, along with the civilians there, safe passage to Zaporizhia, perhaps. But I'm not entirely sure, and that would be very optimistic thinking. And so with that, we're now going to leave the Mariupol area behind, and we're now going to move towards the area of Zaporizhia, where today we can see that the Ukrainians have destroyed SPGs near this area. So with that, I'm going to let y'all see the video. Of course, it's got copyrighted music, but you can see there the SPG unit had set up in a field, and it's now being mercilessly bombarded by artillery, wiping out at least one or two of the SPGs where they were sitting. So that's the end of the video. It is good to see, once again, that the Ukrainian units are smacking the living daylights out of the Russians, and hopefully they continue to do so. With that, we're now going to move into Belarus, where we've heard that Lukashenko is joining the war. Wait a minute. He wants to end the war. And you heard that right. He's actually talking about this war has dragged on too long, and that him and his government are trying everything as much as possible to get the Russians out of this war. Now, that is the ultimate 180 that we've ever seen in modern politics and diplomacy, really. I believe diplomacy is a more proper term instead of politics. Politics is a domestic thing. Diplomacy is an international thing among multiple countries. But according to this BBC article, which I found online, and I have been able to verify it for a pretty large deal, so this is actually one of the first times mainstream news has been included on the stream. It's a very rare occasion. But Lukashenko actually said in this article that the war is dragging on and is not going as planned, and that Belarus is trying to get Russia to stop the war as soon as possible. So that is a way to end today, and it's showing that the Russians are even losing support for this war in their puppet countries that surround them, like Belarus. So hopefully, the Belarusians' words aren't falling on deaf ears, and the Russians are actually considering ending this war. So hopefully they are. Hopefully this isn't just some kind of a ruse from Lukashenko. Although we do actually have a legacy of Lukashenko doing things that are slightly pro-Western, and that sounds weird, but he actually had a pretty large dealing in the Georgian War, and he actually was kind of siding with the West and trying to get Russia to stop the war then. And when the war stopped, he actually complained that the Western countries didn't give him enough credit for trying to end that war as soon as possible. So maybe this is serious talk from him. I'm not entirely sure. But still, it's something interesting to look at, and we will try and keep apprised of that situation and see if the Belarusians are actually having a change of heart and don't actually support this war as much as they originally did at the start. And so with that, we're reaching the end of the news. And so while before I actually play this, I'm actually thinking about doing this as the daily end to the news for the streams, because I don't really like to just cut it off and say that's the end of the news. And before we go into it, there is just one bit of news left. So everyone don't leave. We're not about to go into the question segment yet. But this is the address from President Zelensky. And every single day he gives one of these addresses. And I was wondering today, do y'all think this would be an appropriate way to end every single day as the address and kind of a summary of the day's events from the president of Ukraine? If you would like to see that, make sure to put a yes in the chat. Just a yes will do. If you wouldn't, make sure to make it a no. But with that, that's how we're going to wrap up today's news. We're going to show the address from the president, and then we will go right into the questions. So with that, here is the address from the one and only, the man, the myth, and the legend, President Zelensky, from the 5th of May. So I'm going to unmute this, and then I'm going to put it full screen, so that way y'all can watch it. And here we go.
Славні народи найсміливішої країни. Зазвичай я звертаюся в цей час і саме так до українців і українок щовечора, коли підсумовую події дня, що минає. Щовечора від першого дня цієї повномасштабної війни Росії проти нашої держави, України. Щовечора я звітую суспільству про те, що зроблено для захисту держави, про те, чого вдалося досягнути Збройним силам України, про те, як ми допомагаємо нашим людям і про те, які міжнародні переговори відбулись. Наприклад, сьогодні однією з помітних новин стало повідомлення про нашу з тобою розмову, Борисе. Кожного разу, коли відбуваються такі переговори, це дуже важливо для моєї держави, для України. І не менш важливо, впевнений, для Британії, бо це і про незламність, і про сміливість, і про лідерство, яке ми демонструємо разом, українські і британські народи, у захисті свободи, нашої спільної свободи. Російські війська сьогодні, як і кожного дня протягом цієї війни, продовжували бомбардування наших міст і наших людей. Наприклад, моя традиційна ранкова нарада з військовими, з керівництвом війська, з урядовцями, з дипломатами пройшла під звуки сирени, повітряної тривоги. Ось така наша реальність. Ракетні удари кожного дня. Позавчора, у день, коли ти, Борисе, виступав у нашому парламенті, я тобі вдячний ще раз, в цей день російська армія нанесла по Україні 15 ударів. 15 ракетних ударів. І це можна назвати певним російським компліментом твоїй блискучій промові і нашій плідній міждержавній співпраці. Бо вчора таких ударів було 7. Тільки 7. Очевидно, що Росію дратує наша близькість України і Британії. А отже, це точно означає, що ми дійсно потужно захищаємо свободу в Європі. Загалом, за час цієї війни російська армія використала проти України вже 2014 ракет. Зафіксовано 2682 появи російських бойових літаків у нашому небі. Кожен з таких прильотів – це загибель наших людей, це руйнування нашої інфраструктури. Якщо взяти тільки медичну інфраструктуру, то на сьогодні російські війська знищили або пошкодили вже майже 400 закладів охорони здоров'я. Це лікарні, пологові будинки, амбулаторії тощо. В тимчасово окупованих районах України на Сході і на Півдні просто катастрофічна ситуація з доступом до медичних послуг і ліків. Не вистачає навіть найпростіших препаратів. Росія принесла в Україну, в Європу такі проблеми, які ми уявити не могли ще кілька місяців тому. Це фактично повна відсутність лікування для хворих на рак, це вкрай ускладнений чи повністю відсутній доступ до інсуліну для хворих на цукровий діабет, це неможливість провести хірургічні операції, це навіть просто нестача антибіотиків. Ось це наслідки російської окупації для частини нашої землі, для частини нашого народу, який ми повинні звільнити від цих загарбників. І ми це обов'язково зробимо завдяки, зокрема, і вашій підтримці. І сьогодні продовжили рятувальну операцію з Маріуполя за допомоги Організації Об'єднаних Націй, Міжнародного комітету Червоного Хреста. Люди на шляху до безпечної території. Вже більше 150 людей з Азовсталі і ще більше 300 людей з самого Маріуполя і околиць, які цього тижня вийшли гуманітарним коридором, отримують всю допомогу, яка їм зараз дуже потрібна. Медичну, відновлення документів, грошову допомогу, зв'язок з рідними, з близькими, сім'ями. Наразі російські обстріли і штурм Азовсталі не припиняються, але ще потрібно вивести звідти цивільних, жінок вивести, дітей, багато дітей, які там залишились. Просто уявіть, це пекло, а там діти. Більше 2 місяців постійних обстрілів, бомбардувань, постійної смерті поруч. Очікуємо дієвого режиму тиші, робимо все, щоб знайти рішення для порятунку і наших військових, героїв, які тримають оборону Маріуполя проти переважаючої кількості окупантів. Там різні підрозділи, у них багато поранених, але вони не здаються. Вони тримають позиції. Не здаємося і ми. Щоденно вся команда шукає такий варіант, який дозволить гарантувати безпеку цим людям. І я вдячний усім, хто допомагає, усім, хто запропонував посередництво і вкладає свої зусилля у те, щоб українці були врятовані. Сьогодні звернувся до учасників донорської конференції високого рівня, яка відбулася у Варшаві. Це також елемент нашого захисту, елемент захисту всієї Європи, бо не тільки на полі бою вирішується зараз доля нашої держави та майбутнє континенту, але й на економічному полі, на полі готовності світових лідерів об'єднатись, щоб відновити Україну після цієї війни і дати стабільність, безпеку центру і сходу Європи. Маємо результат. Оголошено, що на цій конференції зібрано $6,5 мільярдів. І це добре. Але це лише частина того, що дійсно потрібно, щоб відновити нормальне життя на всій території, куди Росія принесла війну. Тому потрібен і сучасний аналог плану Маршалла для України. Потрібна потужніша участь країн вільного світу та міжнародних інституцій. І говорив про це сьогодні я на конференції. Втім, ми закликаємо до співпраці і підтримки кожного і кожну, усіх, для кого свобода має значення. Тому сьогодні ж відбувся запуск United 24, глобальної ініціативи, яка об'єднає людей з усього світу довкола бажання допомогти Україні. І я запрошую вас приєднатись до цієї ініціативи. Початкова складова – це одноіменна платформа для збору коштів на підтримку нашої боротьби United 24. Її головна мета – збільшити обсяг пожертв для України, буквально декілька кліків, і кожна людина може долучитися до того напрямку, який вважає ця людина найбільш корисним саме зараз і саме для себе, бо щомісячно Україна потребує до $7 мільярдів на покриття дефіциту державного бюджету. І загалом вже прораховано більше $600 мільярдів на відновлення того, що російська армія зруйнувала. Просто уявіть цей масштаб. Тому кожен прояв підтримки, кожна щира допомога Україні мають значення. Зокрема, і ваша сьогодні. Пані та панове, друзі, якби всі у світі, чи хоча б переважна більшість були б такими ж незламними, сміливими, лідерськими, як Україна, як Британія, то я впевнений, ми б уже покінчили з цією війною і відновили мир на всій нашій звільненій території для усіх наших людей. Але ми ще маємо боротись, як ти, Борисе, до речі, сказав, звертаючись до нашої Верховної Ради позавчора, ми ще пишемо одну з найбільш переможних глав нашої історії. І зараз можна оцінити значення цієї глави, зокрема, і по такому факту. 11 672 наших захисника і захисниці вже відзначені державними нагородами за мужність і ефективний захист України. Трохи більше, ніж за 10 тижнів. 11 672 людини. А за кілька хвилин до цього звернення я підписав указ про нагородження ще 286 військовослужбовців Збройних сил України. Саме на плечах цих хоробрих воїнів та їхніх побратимів тримається зараз Україна. І якщо чесно, вся Європа. І я дякую вам за реальну дієву підтримку цієї боротьби. Bravery is rightly believed the first of human qualities as it guarantees all others. Дякую, Британія. Дякую, Борисе. Дякую всім вам. Слава Україні!
So that was the end of the president's address for today, and we are now going to move on to the questions. Of course, the president has a lot of great things to say, and he is an incredibly good man with great intentions, and I don't really think anyone believed that one of the most popular comedians of Ukraine would become the nation's most popular and most famous leader. And so with that, we're now going to move on into the question segment, and that is the end of the news for day 71. And with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So first up, we have an $18 donation from Philippe Richer, who says, "Who do you think would win in a fist fight between Zelensky and Putin?"
Oh, well, I mean, Putin doesn't have a perfectly chiseled body. I mean, you can kind of tell, but that's nothing I can really say. That's not really like a position of like, are you even lifting, bro? Because I kind of have the same body. So really, him and me are kind of on par with that. But still, I think Zelensky, although he's a bit of a shorter guy, could take Putin on in a brawl any day. Like, look at how Putin has to grab onto a table just to keep himself upright. Zelensky has more power in his voice than Putin has just sitting in a chair, which tells you a lot about, let me think of the proper words. Tells you a lot about the strength of Zelensky alone. I mean, like, honestly, yeah, I mean, like, hands down, there's really no way to actually break that down into great detail. Zelensky would beat Putin to death in a fist fight for sure. So I hope that addresses the question, and I do thank you so much for the support. It does help out this channel a lot. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
I got to say, Enforcer, don't you think Zelensky is kind of built, though? I mean, he's kind of short, but he's pretty much built, I would say. And then, also you got on the other hand, Putin's a judo master of sorts. So that'd be a close one, I think.
Yeah, but Putin got his black belt revoked, though. And, like, it's kind of like a wizard thing with the rocks and stuff. Like, if you get the rocks taken away from you, you don't have the powers anymore. And so if you get the black belt taken away from you, like, Putin's just, like, lost all of his muscles. Like, they all deflated, they went, and, they have nothing in them anymore. So Zelensky would take him on any day. That judo stuff's got nothing on a solid punch to the face. Just like Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so I know that Putin would get punched in the mouth and it'd be over. So I mean, like, what do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, I can see it both ways. Honestly, I could see it as being a fair fight. Obviously, I'd be rooting for Zelensky. I wouldn't be rooting for Putin, but just like on a sort of even level, that it might be a little even.
Yeah, maybe. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $18 donation from Stan Pollard, who says, "Can you outline the Russian border and keep up the great work? Matt needs a raise."
Well, we're looking into it. I mean, like, one thing, though, is, not to get too much into the details of what goes on in the background, but we're trying to figure out what the average budget for each month will be, and then based off of that, we're trying to figure out what kind of raise he will get. So I do thank you very much for the support, and we will look into that, of course. But with that, I'm going to actually draw up the Ukrainian and Russian border that they share, and I'm going to highlight it in some kind of color. I don't want to make this map too complicated, but this is something I do think would be nice to see, at least heavily detailed. So I'll do that real quick. And so everyone just bear with me for just a second. We're going to get through this, and then we're going to move on to the next question. All right, make the right there, make the corner, go down, just like so. Just gonna do a little zigzag there, and then go down, do that, that. So let's see, let's keep it moving on down, right there, further on down the line, past Kharkiv. God bless the defenders of Kharkiv. Those people are doing an amazing job. Keep on moving down, around the line, this way. Gotta get that in there a little bit. And once again, this is a rough approximation. Like, it's not going to be like a Mona Lisa, and I'm not going to be like the next America Vespucci or anything, but this will be a decent enough map. So, well, a decent enough outline of the border. So, just hang on, everyone. We're almost done. We're almost done. So give me just a second. I'm gonna get that little thing right there. Keep her on moving. I just do a big straight line right there. Almost done, everyone. Hang on. And we are just a mile away from the coast, and we're there. So let me go and put that in as the Russian-Ukrainian border. And let's figure out a color for this thing. So it's 919 miles long. That's actually much longer than I was thinking. And we'll put this in purple, just so that way it's incredibly different. So, yep, that is the Russian-Ukrainian border right there. So I hope that answers your question. I hope it actually does fix what you're asking for on the map. And with that, thank you so much for the support. It helps this channel to keep going. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $15 donation from Ben Wen, who says, the Russian army is ranked number 2 in the world by global firepower. Given their current failures, where would you rank them among the elites or among the elite armies of the world?
I wouldn't rank them anywhere among the elite armies in the world. And something with the military people, like, this is like I'm not talking about like soldiers and stuff. I'm talking about the people who obsess with military things. Is that these people don't understand that the basis of a good army is a good economy and a good nation. And without a good economy or a great nation, you can't build a great army. And so they always, the military channels like that, like We Are the Mighty and stuff like that, yeah, I'll call them out. I don't like them. They always don't ever weigh anything like that into the equation. And they're always just looking at what's on paper. Like, oh, Russia has 12,000 tanks. We'll take that literally. They have 1.2 million troops. We'll take that literally. And then they never go into, like, the breakdown of it. Like, well, out of those 1.2 million troops, 730,000 of them are in the army, and most of them are conscripts with less than a year's service under their belts, or even much less. And they don't ever take that into consideration. And so, honestly, I think that ranking is highly overrated. Just because they have a large army in terms of size and the amount of equipment doesn't mean squad if you can never fund it properly to actually field all of it, or even supply it to actually make sure that it's actually usable. So really, let's name off all the countries I believe would place above the Russians in terms of their military power, and this will, of course, be kind of like my tier list, and it'll be ranking them from best to worst. And of course, this will heavily be reliant on their economic status in a way. So starting off, the United States is, of course, number 1. Number 2 would definitely be China. China is trying to get up there right now, but still, they're leagues behind the United States at the moment. The third most powerful country in the world, y'all may be surprised for me to say, but I'm kind of tied in between the British and the French. They don't have incredibly large economies they're not like the top 5 largest economies in the world, but they still have nuclear arms, and they also have pretty sizable, well-trained militaries that would be incredibly competent given the chance. And so, really, honestly, the British and the French are kind of tied for number 3 and 4. Number 5 would be Japan. That's kind of an interesting one. That one's kind of also tied with the Germans. The Germans and the Japanese have kind of been limited due to their constitutions on how large their military can get. And so, it's kind of a toss-up there, but the Japanese economy is larger than the German one by a pretty decent bit, and so it gives them a lot more room to grow out their military just because they have an incredibly good economy. But still, there are hindrances to that economy that you have to look at. For example, a large amount of their resources have to be imported from other countries because they don't have any domestic iron production or raw material production for that matter at all. So right now, we've got the United States number 1, China number 2, the UK and France. I'll put Britain as number 3 just because. France number 4, Japan number 5, Germany would be number 6, and then after that, you start getting further and further down the list. But one country I would not consider to be in the top 10 would be the Russians, actually, and I thought that well before the war because it's just an incredibly poor military. I mean, there's no redeeming qualities to it rather than the incredibly small amount of high-tech equipment that they field. And that's what they've been relying on to make sure that the whole entire world believes that they have a good military, because they only showcase the best stuff, and they do it at the Victory Day parades. And so all the time, that Victory Day parade is just bolstering this idea that the whole entire Russian military is using T-90Ms, T-14 Armadas, and the most modern, up-to-date equipment. But what most people don't know is that most of the time, those vehicles in the military parade are the only ones of their kind, and there's not really many more vehicles like them beyond that. So, honestly, saying they're not in the top 10 may be a little bit of an overstatement. I would say they're around number 9 or number 10 most likely, because I do believe that the Polish may actually be able to outdo them as well. And we know right now that the Ukrainians are outdoing them, and they're an incredibly low rate military. Like, if I actually had to put them on a scale, they're low end. I would say probably like in the 20s or the 30s. But still, they were doing an incredibly good job, so that gives you an idea of, on paper, how bad the Russians actually could do, is that they could actually be in the tier list down in the 20s and 30s or even lower with the Ukrainians. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that answers the question. It was a very kind of like in-depth explanation, so I hope that one was worth its bang for the buck. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Bass Girl, who says, "This is for Enforcer Matt's raise. Matt is Colonel Lee Spring." And thank you very much, Bass Girl, for contributing to the Enforcer Matt Fund. And Enforcer, it looks like this movement is gaining a little steam here.
Oh yeah? Well,
Yeah.
we'll raise your income by another penny, so that way you can afford the pickles from the pickle stand down the street. Anyways, I thank you so much for the support, Bass Girl. We will look into giving Matthew a raise. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Thomas Clark, who says, like the cheap Putin Army standard inflatable doll, could UA use inflatable tanks and decoys a la Britain and World War II to throw off bombardment and decoy strikes? Or would Team Putin Nikon camera drones not be fooled?
That's a tough question. You see, the thing is that how many inflatable women can the Ukrainians reap from the Russian military? And right now, we've only seen one. But I do believe that a lot of Western European countries may be able to supply them an incredibly high amount, maybe even of better quality, to the Ukrainians to use. Honestly, I think that the Russians may be fooled. You know, something I was thinking would be the best way to fool the Russians is to think that the rapture is occurring in Ukraine. And hear me out, and here's how they do it. Okay, you weight down the bottom of the feet of these dolls, you know what I mean? And you fill them with helium, and so the bottom of these things are weighed down, and so they'll stand upright, and they'll float upwards in the air. And so a drone would be flying over, and it would just be looking at these like mannequins. They wouldn't know it because they couldn't really tell all too much, and they'd just be floating up into the sky, and the Russians would be like, oh my god, what's going on? But with that's kind of an outlandish thing. Of course, I don't really think that would work all too well. I think they'd be able to see through it really easily. But with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope you were entertained by my little crazy aside there about what they could do. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, before I move on to the next one, I want to give a quick shout out to a channel regular. And sorry, I always have a problem saying this name, Lilith Embers. She said she is in the ER tonight, suffering from an allergic reaction. And I just want to give a shout out real quick to let you know that we hope you get better soon, and hopefully everything turns out good. And thank you for watching the stream. It's crazy. You're in the ER and you're still watching the stream. That's a true supporter right there, and we appreciate it very much. And
Yeah.
Enforcer, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, that's a true trooper right there. I mean, thank you so much, Willis Embers, for enjoying the stream that much that you're even in the emergency room right now watching this. I don't know if you're watching this on the TV in the room. I think you might not be able to because most hospitals around here, that would be kind of tough to do. And if you're just watching this on your phone, regardless how you're watching it, that's crazy. I don't know if like nurses are walking in or something and you're like, look, that's the Enforcer. That would be crazy if you were. But still, that's insane to me that you're watching this in the emergency room. I hope you're okay, because an allergic reaction that's taking you to the hospital has got to be rough. Unfortunately, I have never had, well, fortunately, I guess, I've never really had an allergic reaction like that to understand what that would be like. And the worst thing I've had is like pneumonia, and that took me to the hospital because I was like close to death. I had like a fever of like 105 or 6 or something. It was high. But I've never had an allergic reaction, and I never really know what that feels like. I know that it has to do with a lot of swelling and stuff. So I hope that you're fine. I hope you get through that okay. And I do thank you so much for still sticking with us on the stream and watching it. And I'm glad that you enjoy it so much. And I hope that it's helping the allergic reaction side of things and having to take a trip to the hospital be a little less taxing on the mind, and you're just watching the stream and enjoying it. So I thank you so much, Willis Embers. That's really cool that you're watching the stream even under those kind of circumstances, and I hope that you do have a very speedy recovery. And with that, I thank you so much again for being here tonight, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Landar, who says, I'm matching Bass Girl's contribution because they got the small moth versus large moth answer correct.
I don't know what that means, but I do thank you very much for the support, and that is neat to know that you are matching Bass Girl. How many other people could match Bass Girl? I don't know. But anyways, with that, I thank you so much for the support once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, it's time for the sockeye salmon. S. Moore puts in a donation of $15 and says, at the Salmon Nation Caucus in the Pacific, an old king salmon stated, it's best to shoot the archer, not the arrow. The sockeye asks, why are the Ukrainians not shooting the archers in Russia?
They have been trying. They have not been completely overlooking that. They have destroyed 4 short-range ballistic missile launcher vehicles, like we've seen before in the videos about the Tachkas being fired from inside of Russia. Also, I believe that is including the Caliber missiles as well. And we have seen them destroying a few of those vehicles, but it's incredibly hard to do that because those vehicles are mobile. And so you do have to get a pretty good idea in advance of where they're going, and that requires inside information, which may be hard for the Ukrainians to get. And so while they have been trying, it doesn't really look like the Ukrainians have been met with a lot of success in that regard. But I do agree that it is more important to get the archer than it is to shoot the arrow. But still, if you're stopping the arrow from reaching its target, I guess it's kind of a success either way. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the question and kind of give an answer as to the status of them actually trying to destroy the launchers themselves. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $15 donation from Praise Adonai, who says, Enforcer, has Ukraine received the Panzer Hog 2000 that should be capable of hitting the Kerch Straits Bridge? And RR, is the Panzer 2000 the largest artillery piece on wheels?
I believe it is, if I'm correct. The Panzerhaubitze, which I may be pronouncing that wrong. I'm sorry if I am. I am an American and I speak English. I've spoken English my entire life. I still can't get it right, and I haven't really spoken many other foreign languages well. So don't hold it against me if I'm mispronouncing this. But yes, this is a Panzer 2000. We'll just call it a Panzer 2000. It is the German SPG. And it is incredibly cool looking. If it has anything going for it, it's the looks. It's a really cool looking SPG. But to answer that question, I'm not really sure if it is the largest one on Earth. It's one of the most powerful. It was deployed in the 2010s. Yeah, it was not produced in the 2010s. It was apparently designed from 87 to 96. Let's see here. It is capable of a very high rate of fire. It can fire 3 rounds in 9 seconds. Golly. Do y'all know how fast it is? That's about as fast as you can reload a bolt-action rifle if you're loading it somewhat slowly. So that's incredibly fast. 10 rounds in 56 seconds. And, depending on barrel heating, fire between 10 and 13 rounds per minute continuously. That is an incredibly high rate of fire, y'all. If y'all don't know a lot about how long it takes to reload a tank's gun alone and how long it takes for an SPG to reload under normal conditions, this is considered a machine gun with this kind of rate of fire. Let's see. But let's read up a little bit more about it. Yikes. Can't really find any information about it being the largest. But let's see about the range here on the gun, if we can find that. Rheinmetall 155mm L52 with 60 rounds, apparently inside the vehicle. But we don't really get effective range. Effective range can be up to 42 miles, apparently, with the RAP, which is a rocket-assisted projectile. So 42 miles. Let's measure that out on the map now that we know the maximum range. Ooh, yikes. I can already tell you that's going to be way too far. 42 miles from the shortest distance. Let's say it's near Novakakovka. That's 42 miles right there. And so Kerch is still 180 miles out. So while it is a nice idea to think that the Panzer 2000 could hit the Kerch Bridge, unfortunately, it just doesn't have the range. But I am glad to see that the Germans are providing massive SPGs that have an incredibly high rate of fire to the Ukrainians, because that will certainly help them out in destroying Russian units that much quicker, just due to the amount of the rate of fire that Panzer can lay out that quickly. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that kind of does answer the question in a way about the Panzer 2000's capabilities and also what it will be able to do. And with that, I thank you so much for the support again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Christian Dubois, or Dubois. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but the comment is Slava Ukraine to my old college roommate and fellow channel watcher, Bill Travascio. Love the channel and keep up the good work. And I have to say, if you found your old college roommate on this channel, that is absolutely insane, like odds of that actually happening.
Dude, think about that. He's sitting in here and he's like, he's just watching the stream, and then you see someone comment in the live chat, and he's like, "Is that my roommate from like college?" Dude, that's actually crazy, honestly. So I'm pretty glad that we're actually bringing people together that haven't seen each other from a while. That's crazy, really, to think about. But that's really neat. And thank you so much for the support. I'm glad that you do enjoy the channel, and I am glad that's actually reconnecting you to old friends in a way. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, Bill Travascio puts in a $10 donation and says, Hiram Slava to my former college roommate and fellow channel watcher, Christian Dubois. Viva la Leaf Spring Army and great stream enforcer and Matt.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And look at this. We've got like a whole entire story arc happening in the super chats alone. That's crazy that y'all met each other again here in this live chat. And that's really neat. It's cool to know that y'all weren't just roommates, but you also had similar interests too. So thank you once again to both of y'all for the support, and it is really cool to know that y'all actually did meet each other again here in this live chat out of all the places in the world. So thank you once again for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Cult member who says, Operator Starsky said the Soviet army was so feared in the past, it's because Ukrainians were part of that army.
That might be true. I mean, like, I think the Soviet army was just feared because it had the power of the Soviet Union levied behind it. The Soviet Union it didn't just encompass the Ukrainians. I think that's giving, like, honestly, while I am pro-Ukrainian, that's giving a little bit too much credit to the Ukrainians, because back in the day, the Soviet Union didn't just include them. It included the Warsaw Pact countries like East Germany, Poland, the Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, you know, not Yugoslavia, of course. And then it also included Kazakhstan. Well, that was the Warsaw Pact countries that I just listed off. But then the Soviet Union itself encompassed the Baltic states, Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, all of the stands pretty much except for Afghanistan. And so while that may be the case, I think they were more so feared because back then the Soviets were actually a better put together fighting force than they are now, divided up amongst all the post-federations that the Soviet Union collapsed into. But still, yeah, I mean, like, you know, in a small way, the Soviet military was feared because of the Ukrainians. So I do thank you very much for the support. That's kind of what I'm thinking about it, because, you know, I mean, like, that's giving a little bit too much credit. Like, the Ukrainians weren't the only people in the Soviet military. The Soviet military was made up of soldiers from around the Union, in a way. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Landar again, who says, to set the record straight, Bass come in different varieties. Smallmouth and largemouth are the two most common. Real fishermen consider the smallmouth a small mouth.
Oh, okay. Well, I thank you very much for the support. And I do thank you for sharing the info with us, although I don't know how fishing got involved with this channel, rather than the sockeye salmon stuff. That I understand. But the bass thing, I don't really know where it's coming from. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that kind of addresses what I'm thinking about that right now. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $8 donation from AmAxO Reload, who says, "Do you think the word orcs is appropriate for Russian soldiers?"
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm really indifferent to it, honestly. The question is it appropriate? The answer is kind of yeah. Because if you look at how they act around the country, they might as well be orcs. You know, they just kill people senselessly. I mean, like, I'm not really a big fan of the Russian military or the government at all. So if any kind of term that's used negatively against them, you know, kind of like the British here in the United States during the Revolutionary War, they were called all kinds of names. Lobsterback was actually not one of them. That was something that was come up with after the war. So I do thank you very much for the support. Maybe Matthew would like to weigh in on that a little bit, because I would like to hear his input on that. What do you think about that, Matthew? Do you think orcs is a proper term to use?
I've never even heard the term used, honestly, so I couldn't really say.
What? That's crazy. It's been in our chat a million times. Look, Andrew Marr just said it, and then it got deleted by the Nightbot.
Yeah, and the Nightbot just deletes it on its own. I don't even know why it's deleting it.
Yeah, then Andrew Marr said it's an insult to orcs, and then Lucius said, orc crap the bed, and then both of them got removed. Apparently, the Nightbot's not allowing orcs. That's interesting to me. I did not know that. But yeah.
The Nightbot is a very finicky thing. Like, everybody's had the run-ins with the Nightbot, and everybody understands sometimes you're on the Nightbot's good side, and sometimes you're on its bad side. It's just a matter of chance, basically.
Yeah, true, I guess. But anyways, I hope that kind of addresses the orc thing on my opinion. Unfortunately, Matthew hasn't really heard of it much. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Mech Tactical, who says, "You got a shout out on the Shills live stream today. Operator Starsky wants to be on your live stream. He confirmed it himself. Have his email if you need it." And I must say, before the enforcer answers, I was actually on there for the last 5 minutes of the live stream. I'm not sure if anybody saw it, but I actually put a comment in right at the end. But yeah, that was pretty cool if we actually got a shout out. I wasn't around to hear it, but that's pretty cool.
Well, I do thank you very much for bringing that up to us as well, because unfortunately, I don't have time to watch the streams. So if he is willing to do that, please send over his email to me on Discord, so that way I can shoot one over to him real quick and try and get him here on the stream for the Sunday night fundraiser, which will be coming up incredibly soon. Not too far from now, as a matter of fact. So I thank you so much for the support, and also sharing that huge news with us, and hopefully, everyone, we can get Operator Starsky on here for a Sunday night fundraiser. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from M90 Regal Grand Sport, who says, "Why are orcs less than human trash? We know they are less than human. Is it because God knows they aren't human? Also, Omega Speedmaster Professional Current reference for life."
What? What was the last part about that? Speedmaster something reference?
I think he was referencing a watch.
Huh, okay. Well, thank you very much for the support. And to answer the question, you know, I don't really want to get into degrading them too bad, because I don't really know how far the YouTube terms of service will allow me to go before the TVA, you know, the Time Variance Authority, comes down here and smacks me around a little. But I mean, you know, I don't know. I really don't want to answer that question, honestly, because I'm scared if I go too far with this, YouTube will come and get me. So I thank you very much for the support. To try and answer the question, at least in some way. Also, could someone translate what Perennial Millennial just said? Because he just said something. You know what? We're going to translate that here on stream. Give me just a second, everyone. And then we're going to get back to your question. Copy. Now we're going to go into Google Translate. We're going to try it in Russian first, just in case if it's Russian. Then we'll try Ukrainian. Lean and show. Don't be like your power, people. That strength. Don't fight. Everything that the evil survived, that we have good people, did not damage anything. I don't know what that means. What do you take from that, Matthew?
I have no idea. It sounds like a Google Translate mess.
It sounds like Google Translate's not really getting the actual meaning behind that message, but actually it appears that it was written in Ukrainian because the Google Translator corrected this to Ukrainian. So, I think I kind of get the idea of what that's saying, but unfortunately I don't really know how to comment on it. But I do thank you for sending that through. I think that's actually a positive message, but I really can't tell. It's kind of a little cryptic to me in a way. But I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, I hope I kind of answered your question about the orc thing, you know, the other guy who sent in the orc question a little bit. I do think that they are pretty degenerate from their actions. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that kind of answers it in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, I just want to say that Diffuse56 said that he was actually the one who asked Starsky on the stream today about coming onto the show. So Diffuse, thank you very much. And it's not selfish at all, really. You're owed credit. You get credit for it. But anyways, moving on to the next comment we have a $10 donation from Thomas Lalonde, who says, "What are your top 5 most important cities to defend currently that are under attack?"
So top 5, there's really not even 5 cities on the front line anymore. But to answer that question, and this will also include a perimeter around the city, but Kharkiv is, of course, a critically important one. Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, I'm going to kind of count that as one city as a whole. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going through this like weird hiccup thing. Excuse me right now. But Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, we're going to count that as one city. So we've gotten 2 right there. We're going to count the perimeter around Izium as one of those, because while it's not actually the city itself that they're defending, they're stopping the Russians from pushing further on out from Izium. So that will be our 3rd one. The 4th one will be Zaporizhia, because it seems like the Russians are trying to head up that way, and it looks like they've been stopped so far, and I believe that's the most critical one to defend as of now. And the final one, really those are the major ones that I see on the front lines right now that would be important to protect. If I had to pick a 5th one, I would pick Liman. I have heard that the Russians are heading in that direction. It is a major railhead for the area, and also if the Russians manage to take Liman, it could split this Ukrainian front in 2. So, I think those would be the major 5 that I would try and protect from. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that kind of answers the question in a way. They're critically important mostly because they're major population centers, and also most of them are major logistics hubs for the Ukrainian armed forces. And so if they lose them, their supply lines will be heavily crippled because they won't be as easily accessible just a few miles back. Like, for example, if the Ukrainians got pushed out of Kharkiv and they were now on the edge of the city, they would have to find railheads further back, most likely in Poltava, and then truck forward the supplies up to the area around Kharkiv, where the Russians would most likely be able to rebuild the railroad tracks if they held the area long enough, and then railroad the supplies straight into the city and almost straight to the units. So it would really really help out the Russian supply lines a lot, while damaging the Ukrainians to the point that they may actually start to crumble and get pushed back really far. So I hope that kind of answers the question. And I thank you very much for the support. It does help out this channel a lot, and it helps us to go even further and make sure that we can keep these streams running for even longer. So thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Caffeine, who says, "Enforcer, your voice in half speed is almost as sexy as Matt's. Nice manly baritone."
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Of course, I actually up my tone a lot more. I usually talk like this all the time, but I also do that to make sure that there is... wow, I just smacked my teeth together. But I also do that to make sure that there is fluctuation in my voice, because if I talk normally like this, there's no fluctuation in my voice, and it sounds very boring to hear. And so I don't want to talk like that all too much, because that will get boring to people. And so I actually talk much higher up, and it's a deliberate choice on my part, so that way listening to me is a little bit more interesting and engaging in a way. So I thank you very much for the support, and I can agree that Matthew actually does keep baritone a lot more. And for some reason, if y'all want me to talk lower and more monotone, I can do that. In fact, we're going to run a poll. Do y'all want me to talk more monotone or not? Because this is something I'm actually doing based off of suggestions from my family. They're always like, "You talk too monotone. You need to talk like at a higher volume." And so that's what I've been doing. But anyways, I'm going to run the poll. Should I talk in a lower, more monotone voice? And yes or no, and we'll throw that up and we'll get some answers to that. But I thank you very much for the support. Yes, Matthew does have a pretty good voice, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $30 donation from M90 Regal Grand Sport again, who says, what do you call 1.2 million murdered orcs and say 10 million of their direct relatives? I say relatives in quotes because not human garbage trash. God's will.
Yikes. Well, one thing I don't want to do is demand the extermination of an entire people. While the Russian military and the government is sick, I wouldn't really want to see a whole bunch of them just getting slaughtered, just to be exterminated in a way, because then, because we're absolutely bewildered over here whenever the Russians talk about nuking the British and the Irish and stuff like that. We would pretty much be doing the same thing to them, and we'd be talking about as crazy as them. And that's one thing I really don't want to do, because then we're starting to exit the areas of reasonableness, and we're starting to go into savagery ourselves. So I don't really want to go down that path, but I can kind of see where you're coming from. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the question in a way. And with that, before we move on to the next one, I've seen that we've gotten 352 votes in right now, and 85% of y'all actually want me to keep talking in the higher pitched voice and not in a lower, more monotone voice. So I thank y'all so much for liking it. I always make sure that it's a bit more engaging sounding than normal. And so we're going to end that stream right there, and we can actually see someone asking the Nightbot if it's a man or a woman. Can you answer that question for him real quick, Matthew?
Is the Nightbot a man or a woman? Well, the Nightbot is actually neither. The Nightbot is basically a collection of code.
Yeah, so pretty much it's an amalgamation of your mind that is now coalesced onto the screen. So I thank you very much for the question, Mamba Mentality, but the answer is it is neither. It is just a robot. So I hope that kind of answers both of the questions, and I do thank everyone for enjoying my voice a pretty good deal. I, of course, do it higher pitched deliberately to make sure that it does sound more engaging. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Mech Tactical again. He says, Mr. Blue was countered because they cannot physically deny the damage in Belgorod, so they must choose inside job or did we get hit?
Could you read that one to me one more time?
Yeah, he says, Mr. Blue was countered because they cannot physically deny the damage in Belgorod, or Belgrade? I guess we meant to say Belgorod. So they must choose inside job or did we get hit?
I'm not exactly sure what that's talking about for some reason. It's kind of like slipping my mind there, but I thank you very much for the support. Unfortunately, I really can't answer that question because I don't really know where it's coming from, but I thank you very much for the support. It does help out the channel a lot. And so with that, I hate to do this, but we're going to have to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Ben the Hen, who says, hello, Enforcer. In your opinion, what do you think is the worst strategic move the Russian forces have made in this war so far?
The worst strategic move the Russian forces made in this war so far, and this is an overarching one, it's something that they've been doing on all fronts, but it's poorly planning out their logistics. Now, everyone's always like, Jesus Christ, he's talking about logistics again. Make him stop. But it's true. Logistics are the winning side of a war. If you cannot supply your military, you have lost. Look at here's an example. This is the best one ever. Look at Napoleon. He entered Russia, and at the time, it was normal for an army to live off the land it was passing through. The Russians practiced a scorched earth policy, which pretty much directly interdicted French logistical supplies and stopped them from living off the land. And so the French kept on marching further and further into the Russian Empire, and as they went, the land was burned all around them, and there was no food to be had anywhere. They finally got to Moscow, and the Russians burned pretty much the entire city to the ground, and there was no supplies or any such things to be had there either. And so the French army began to starve and freeze. They had run out of supplies in every direction. Most importantly, food, which is the main thing that keeps people going. And so then they had to turn around and start retreating out of Russia in the middle of winter because there was no way they would survive into the spring because there was just no food for the army to subsist off of. And so as they went back, they once again were walking over the same scorched earth they crossed over before. They had no food. The army slowly died. The Russians were attacking it as it was retreating. And over the course of the entire retreat, pretty much the entire army was destroyed. And once they got back to France, there was so little of an army left that for the first time ever, the coalition actually overpowered France and then exiled Napoleon for the first time. So that kind of gives you an idea of how important logistics are, because they were poorly planned for Napoleon then. And because of that, that was the first failure he actually had to a major degree during the Napoleonic Wars. So I'd kind of argue that the first one was in Egypt. That was, I guess you could say, one of his first failures, but it wasn't a catastrophic failure that pretty much ended his reign as Emperor of France. So I hope that kind of answers the question, and we can see that so far the logistics across the entirety of the front have been poor. Even in the southeastern front, it looks like they still haven't gotten the logistics sorted out. So I hope that does answer the question, and I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from CA Lags. He says, Enforcer, why don't you add a copyright symbol or something in the titles of your video links so you can immediately tell if there's some copyright music?
I don't really know why I don't. Well, I mean, like, the reason why I don't do that is because whenever I hear anything from TikTok, I know 100% that music's copyrighted, because everyone on there is always using this trashy sounding music, in every video, and it's got to be copyrighted. Like, that kind of music is like SoundCloud music, and that's always copyrighted, even if it's terrible. So I don't really run it through a copyright filter, because I just kind of have a good ear to know what's copyrighted and what's not, in a way. I hope that kind of explains it. But I do thank you very much for the support and the suggestion, and I will look into doing that a little bit. So I thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Jason Bourne, who's in the house. He says, their worst strategic mistake was to use leaf springs in their Kamaz trucks.
Well, I like that you're still playing on the joke. It's, of course, good to hear the leaf spring actually make its rounds as a joke again, instead of like the moniker for our community. But yeah, I guess that would be true. It looks like the leaf springs really, I haven't been doing them well. And so I can't agree with that, Jason Bourne. I thank you so much, and I hope you're out there breaking people's necks or something, or whatever Jason Bourne does. So I thank you very much for the support once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another $10 donation from Thomas Lalonde, who says, do you think will Ukraine use the howitzers more in a defensive manner, or will they try to retake ground? Did France give mobile units, and are they currently being used on the front line already?
That's a two-prong question, so hopefully I can remember both parts. It's always hard for me to remember two prongs, because I usually go down a rabbit hole in the first. Yes, the French did give mobile self-propelled guns. They gave the Caesar, I believe is how it's pronounced, although I'm not entirely sure. They gave the Caesar self-propelled gun. It's a wheeled artillery piece. Well, wheeled isn't really an exact description. I'll just pull it up. Of course, that was a terrible spelling. But here is the Caesar SPG right here. This is what it looks like. It's a wheeled artillery piece, as you can see here. It apparently has a pretty high rate of fire, and it's also incredibly mobile and can be set up in a very low amount of time and then packed up and moved on. So yes, they have sent those, and artillery isn't really used in the defensive or the offensive. Much like a rifle, it could be used in either. The artillery could, of course, be used to stop Russian advances in their tracks. It can also be used to help the Ukrainian infantry advance. So I don't really think it'll be used in either, just like solely, where they get these artillery pieces and then they go, okay, all of them are used as defensive weapons. They're going to be kind of used on what the situation requires. So if the Russians are making ground near Izium, the Ukrainians will bombard the Russians in kind of a defensive manner to stall their offensive. In the areas around Kharkiv, where we've seen ground being made, the artillery is going to be used to soften up Russian positions to help the Ukrainians advance. So I hope that kind of answers the question. It just really depends on the situation. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Hoodoo, Texas, who says the O word in Ukraine probably comes from the Latin something for ogre, also Roman referencing hell.
Interesting. Well, I do thank you very much for the support, Hoodoo, and I do thank you very much for sharing that information with us. I did not actually know that that may have been the origin of the word. I believe that we were actually around to see that. Well, yeah, we were. I mean, we've been around since the beginning of this war, but I think the channel was around to actually see the word orc make its way through. and I'm just not really sure how or why. I remember watching it actually coalesce in this chat as a thing, and I kind of saw why, but I forgot it. It was so long ago. That was like 50 or 60 days ago at this point. But I do thank you very much for the support, Hoodoo, and giving possible ideas as to where it came from. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Kevin Scott 76, who says, Enforcer, if Putin dies, do you think the next leader might back off and say Putin was misguided and then accept reforms to modernize Russia?
Oh, yikes. That's a tough one to answer, you see, because usually when your predecessor dies, you usually double down on what they did because then you feel like, well, then usual politician feels like, oh my gosh, their legacy, and I have to continue their legacy. We can see that a lot, here in the United States. Whenever anyone like dies in a political position, their family member steps and they're like, "We're doubling down," like whatever position their original person had, the predecessor is going to have an even more radical position on it, and it's just going to be hardcore on it. So, that's well, that's not entirely true because when you think about World War II, when Hitler killed himself, Admiral Karl Dönitz took over control of, I guess you could call the Reich or whatever was left of it. And then he actually started to negotiate the terms of unconditional surrender with the Western and Eastern forces in a way. So that's not always the case. So I do think that there is a little bit of room in there where the next predecessor of Putin, if he was to die in any circumstances, may go, this war isn't going well, and then end it. Maybe that would be a very popular decision in Russia, and maybe they would know a little bit more than Putin in that regard. So that is something that could happen. Really, honestly, I can see it going either way. It just depends on who would take charge. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And real quick, Enforcer, just a quick answer. Mabel Mike asks, did Israel send the Iron Dome weapon system?
We've heard that they are going to send it, but I haven't heard about it actually arriving there yet. And of course, it will actually have to make its way to a Western European country and then travel by road, most likely, into Ukraine, which I don't really know how that's going to work. Because, first off, they would have to pass through the Bosphorus, as a ship, and then to Odessa or Mykolaiv. We know that there's currently a blockade going on, and the Russians are definitely not going to let weapons of war pass through their blockade to Ukraine. So I'm not really sure how long it's going to take for the Iron Dome to get there, but we have heard Israel say that they're giving something like that to them. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Mycroft, who says, can you explain or maybe research more, if needed, what is in the orange zone near Mariupol? I thought that was the nuclear power plant, but now I know that's wrong. Slava Ukraine.
Hurom Slava and also orange area near Mariupol. Let's pull it up on Google Maps and take a look at that and see what the orange area is that he's talking about. So let's take a look here. Let's take a look-see. Orange area. I think you're talking about this here, aren't you? I think that's the Iliad steel plant. It's another steel plant. It's some other kind of plant. Oh, golly. Okay, I gotta say this, y'all. This is a water treatment plant. Yikes. I'd be scared of getting water out of that thing, honestly. It doesn't really look that well put together, just being honest on that. Like, the water coming out of there is orange itself, but to answer the question, if you're looking at this orange area on the map on Google Maps, that looks like it's part of another steel plant, because you can see right here that it looks like that. So if that is the orange area you're talking about, that's what that is. To talk about power plants, speaking of power plants, oh boy, we can go on and on about power plants, but go down here. There is a power plant down here somewhere. Let me look for it. Orlivka, there's Svitlodarsk and all that. Here's a power plant here. I believe this one is actually oil-fired or something. I'm not particularly certain, but I did notice this earlier.
Enforcer, real quick, Mycroft clarified in the chat. He says that, let me see if I can get back to it. He says he means on the map that you talked about earlier.
Oh,
on your map.
This area? Like right here?
I'm not really sure. I think he said on your map that we talked about earlier.
Oh, I think you're talking about this area. This is kind of like a pinkish red to me. But this is where supposed partisan activity is unfolding. Sorry, I misunderstood that. Um, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm kind of getting distracted now by like what happened there. But this is actually a partisan area where we're assuming that partisan activity is unfolding because we've heard about it, but we haven't really gotten a lot of evidence about that. So I've kind of covered it as a Russian-controlled area, kind of, and that's why it's in a special zone. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you for clarifying that, so that way I could give you a proper answer. But looking at Mariupol, I mean, like, golly, I know that the water treatment plants usually are treating sewage. But I mean, like, usually isn't this like Matthew? Am I correct in saying that usually the sewage water at a water treatment plant is usually recirculated into the water supply?
I think so. I think they treat it and then they put it right back out. But I'm not really sure. I'm no expert on that.
Well, that's why I was throwing it on you because I was going to be that wrong for that. But I think if I remember correctly, water treatment plant purpose. 1 second, y'all. I got to pull this up and find this out. To make water potable, safe to drink, and palatable, pleasant to taste. And honestly, not trying to rat on this water treatment plant or anything, but I don't think this would be potable or palatable coming from this one. Not gonna lie. Can we get a street view? No. Let's see what we can get from Mariupol. Oh man, is Ukraine one of those countries that didn't allow the Google Streetcar? Let me check. No, it allowed the Google Streetcar. It's just that no one went and did it in Mariupol recently. That's kind of sad. Let's see what kind of pictures we have, though, from the area. I want to see what that looks like. The closest we can get is a neighborhood. So let's take a look at this neighborhood real quick. Not bad. Not bad. It's kind of like reminding me of the dacha kind of stuff, I guess. If that's the best way to describe it. Let's go. Let's take a look at downtown. What did downtown look like the last time someone went down there? Let's go right here. This is near the theater on the back side of it. Oh wow, look. Matthew, if you can actually see this, this is actually some kind of high class stuff. Like for the city we're in, this is a nice sidewalk. It's actually incredibly wide too. But yeah, Mariupol.
I'll have to take your word for it.
Yeah, but Mariupol actually looks pretty decent down in the downtown area. It's like really nice and picturesque in a way. Let me go to another street and take a look at it. I'm sorry, y'all. This is I know this isn't answering questions, but now I'm interested. Okay, this street's got a fence, like made of aluminum sheet metal. Pretty nice. We also got some guy rocking the plaid shorts like that. Pretty cool. Is he shirtless? I think he might be shirtless. Nonetheless, we won't judge him. This building's this isn't the best street in town, but it's not bad. I mean, like I've seen worse here in my hometown. So with that, we're now going to stop looking at Mariupol, and we're now going to return to the question segment. So I hope that answered the question about what that area is on the map, and I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $50 donation from M90 Regal Grand Sport. And last night, Sylvester the Cat was doing this. I think M90 is trying to outdo Sylvester. So he says, why did Einstein and Tesla always say that the Russians are the most inferior compared to even African countries? That said, there never has and never will be a large international Russian company because all they do is sell commodities.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I don't really know how far I could go into answering that question, but I don't really know why they would say that. You know, that's kind of based off of some old-fashioned kind of thinking in a way. You know, like social Darwinism, and really don't want to weigh in on that because that's really sketchy ground. You know, it's really tough to cover without stepping on everyone's toes, really. But I do thank you for the support, and to try and answer that question in a way, I'm not going to really try and answer it down that avenue, but I'll try and answer it nonetheless. I think what they were trying to say is that the Russians historically have always been lagging behind the Western European countries. And there's a good reason why. There's actually a good social and technological reason why. And it's because the Russians were at the farthest corner of Europe where there was an actual sizable population. beyond the Ural Mountains, there's really nothing out there. And so the Russians weren't able to get into the Asian sphere of culture, near to China, where a lot of cultural development was going on. And they weren't able to get into the cultural development sphere that occurred over here, like in this circle that my mouse is making, that encompassed Italy, Spain, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Britain. And so they weren't really able to get into that group, and they were on the furthest fringe of it. And so they were always trying to play catch up with these countries that had high populations, incredibly good economies, and were always bouncing around ideas with each other and then creating newer and better ones. And so they were kind of stuck over there on the side, and they were like, wow, like the Renaissance was a thing. And this is like 200 years after it happened. They're like, wow, art's a thing, so let's get into art. And they were always like that. So not to get into like the social Darwinism thing where we're talking about like these people are inferior people to these people, because then we're kind of getting into Mein Kampf ground. But to answer that question, I really think the Russians are just a group of backwards people, just because they have been so far removed throughout the entire course of history from the actual movers and shakers of the European continent, which have been the very Western European countries. So I hope that answers the question. Also, yes, I did forget Portugal. That's because Portugal is Portugal. I'm just playing. I just don't really include Portugal in it all too much, because beyond the age of discovery and them actually expanding their, I guess you could say, colonization efforts into the Americas, they didn't really do a lot to expand things, I guess you could say, culturally or economically or anything like that. So I thank you very much for bringing that up, the person who did say that, Marcia Braga. And with that, I hope I did answer the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And real quick, I just want to say thank you to everybody for your support through the super chats. It's very much appreciated. And real quick, Enforcer, we do have about 10 or 11 super chats left, and we still want to have time to get to our live chat. So would you like to go ahead and put a cutoff on the super chats tonight?
Yes, we will. I'm going to have to, unfortunately, put on a cutoff for the night. If you would like to support the channel, I would actually highly recommend, instead of sending in a super chat now, because we won't be able to answer the question, I highly recommend going to the merch store and getting some of that limited edition merch. It will only be available until tomorrow at midnight, which is only about a day from now, like a full 24 hours. So make sure to get some before it's gone. It is, of course, incredibly cool stuff, and every purchase does support this channel, and 10% of the profits will go to support a charity that we will run on a Sunday night fundraiser. So I thank you all once again for wanting to support us, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, give me just a moment here. Next up, we have a $25 donation from M, who says, I've been listening since day 4. Keep it up. You guys are awesome. What do you think the likelihood of the U.S. sending F-16s or A-10s is? And if they did, any idea on how much training time is needed for the pilots?
It depends on if those pilots have been in a joint training program with the United States previously. If they have, it may not be too long. If they haven't, it may take a while. I'm not really sure how long the Ukrainians are actually looking at. They may be looking at trying to do a crash course with these pilots. Considering that they're already competent in the MiG-29, they may assume that a large amount of their training will just kind of like flow over into the F-16 platform. I'm not really sure how long the training would take. That's something that an actual Ukrainian Air Force member would have to state for themselves. But to answer the other question, we do know that the United States has approved a Lend-Lease, and in that is the supposed idea that they're going to be sending over aircraft. The A-10s haven't really been in the picture. It sounds more like they're going to be sending over F-16s and F-15s, which are, of course, incredibly capable ground strike platforms, and they do get called multi-role aircraft these days because they actually have an incredibly good capability to carry a large amount of air-to-ground ordnance along with air-to-air ordnance. So they're kind of multi-role in a way. And the A-10 is really specialized into that air-to-ground role. So it's called I believe, a strike aircraft, if I'm correct. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from M90 Regal Grand Sport again. And unfortunately, I would prefer not to read that off on stream. I know you're probably just trying to tell us that to be informative, but I just don't want to repeat it just for personal reasons. So thank you again for your support, and we very much appreciate it. Next up.
Oh, man. I thank you very much for the support. I just clicked on it, read it, and Unfortunately, we will not be able to read that one on stream. That one's getting a little bit too far in a certain direction, and even if we read that, I think YouTube's going to come down and get us. But I do thank you very much for the support, M90, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, I want to recognize a $10 donation from Martin Nielsen. Thank you very much for your donation to the channel. And up next, we have an $8 donation from Jonathan Toe, who says, Enforcer, keep up the good work. It's an old maxim that an army fights on its stomach. Food is incredibly important for the morale of the troops.
It is incredibly important, and one of my goals, whenever I think about logistics, is that the logistics should be so good that it's World War II levels of good, where the Japanese, during the island hopping campaigns, were like eating lentils and bugs and stuff, and then they would get demoralized when they heard that the ice cream ship just pulled up near the island, and they're now unloading ice cream to the troops that are currently fighting on the island against them. I would think that a logistical chain should be that effective that you can actually dedicate entire sections of your logistical core to just luxury items to make sure that morale does stay high, because people don't understand until you actually do something. Well, I think that a lot of people don't understand this because, and also I really don't, because I haven't actually had any experience on the field, but I bet a lot of veterans understand that an MRE sucks. Like, an MRE tastes terrible. That's not like the thing you would want to eat all the time. And if you're trying to eat those, you're trying to prove something. So just give up on that and actually eat a steak or something. Because if you gave a veteran an MRE or a steak with some ice cream and told them, what would you like? Would you like a fresh cooked steak with some ice cream, or would you like an MRE? Man, they're going to literally take the MRE, rip it to pieces with their bare hands, and then go eat the steak with the ice cream. Because it's better. And it's warm, and it actually is good. And so you really want to make sure that food is taken care of incredibly. And also, one thing that I've seen military is kind of veering away from in the modern day, and while I don't actually have any military experience, I don't really feel like it's a good direction to go, is that we've seen them veering away from handing out rations of alcohol. And I know that that's something that does give liquid courage, but can also lead them to be less effective, but at the same time, it does boost morale a little bit. Liquid courage is still courage, and also on top of that, it is kind of weird to act like these people like don't drink, and act like they cannot drink while in the service. I know that they can off duty, but sometimes, like before you actually send them into, as they call it in what was that movie, Matthew, with Ben Stiller in it, where that janitor was like, you got to put them in the shit. What was that movie? Tropic Thunder. Tropic Thunder. That was it.
Yeah.
All right,
there
yeah.
you go.
Like when you're about to put them, like they said in Tropic Thunder, in the shit, you might want to actually give them a little bit of liquid courage, so that way it'll be easier for them to, I guess you could say, handle. Not of course make them like in a drunken stupor, but maybe just give them a little buzz or something. At least that's my opinion on it. But I do thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer, address the comment in a way. I can't entirely agree with that. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And bear with us, folks. We only have about 8 super chats to get through, and then we're going to get to the live chat questions. So next up, we have a $5 donation from Diffuse56, who says, I would like a brief waiting room. Without it, I usually miss the last part of the anthem, although I do get to see Corn Pop blowing up that tank.
Come on, man. And I do thank you very much for the support. And I am kind of saddened that we're trying to get rid of the waiting room, although that is a decision I did make in the end, so, whoops. But the reason why I got rid of the waiting room was so that way people would hop in here and get right on the stream. But honestly, I mean, like, the weird thing is that I'm not actually seeing that much of a difference in viewership with a waiting room versus without a waiting room, which is weird to me. So I think we may actually just go back to the waiting room, because it actually gives people a chance to get in here. But at the same time, I hear people in the chat before it starts, he's late. And I'm not late. It's a deliberate decision. So everyone chill out with the late stuff, because when I do something, I'm already here. I've been here since, like, I'm usually sitting in this chair at 8:45 with a whole entire stream set up, and I'm just waiting to go through the motions of getting this thing going. So, I think we'll actually go back to a waiting room tomorrow, because honestly, I don't like hopping straight into it, because it doesn't give people time to get in here and chit chat a little bit and also wait for the huge start, because everyone likes to hear the anthem. So I think we actually will. But with that, I thank you very much for the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Ninos GLG, who says Russia is not fighting Ukraine one-on-one. They're fighting NATO and the US as well, with them pumping endless supply of weapons into Ukraine.
Yes, that's true. They're kind of fighting the entire West in a passive way. And one thing I always like hearing, and I think it's hilarious, is that people will sit there and say, oh, like the Americans are running out of Javelin CLUs and rockets, and they're going to run out, and the Ukrainians are going to be left high and dry. Like, do people really think that the United States would just run out of javelins, go, whoop, we're sold out, bad luck? Like, come on, we have a $660 billion military budget. Obviously, we're not going to sit there and let our own javelin stores run out. I mean, I don't like hearing that, and it's always so goofy. It's always people trying to act like the war is going to be over and Ukraine's a lost cause and stuff. But yeah, I can agree with that. I think that the Russians are pretty much passively fighting the rest of the Western world, not in an outright war, but economically and also supply-wise. So I thank you very much for the support. I can 100% agree with that statement. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Rockets Red Wines, who says the orc term goes with all Ukraine memes saying shall not pass toward the Ruskies, tying in all the LOTR nerdery. Give Matt a raise.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Everyone's asking for Matthew to get raised. Putting pressure on me. The pressure's coming down. But yes, we will look into that. And also, the other thing is the Lord of the Rings thing. I can kind of understand like why people say that kind of stuff and everything. Like everyone's got a thing that they're into, but I just don't really like weighing in movies and pop culture stuff into war because it feels like it's kind of degrading it a little bit. That's why I don't really bring up video games a lot, because whenever I watch the video footage of the tanks being hit, like in the back of my head, there's a piece of me that's saying, wow, that's like a War Thunder side shot. That's incredibly good. I bet you that took out this and that. And I don't really want to do that because I do feel like it's kind of like degrading what we're actually watching in a way, and bringing it to Lord of the Rings. I kind of feel like it takes it in the same direction. But I do understand why people say that, and everyone's got a right to do what they want and say and think and all that, but that's kind of my position on. So I don't really like weigh in a lot on like pop culture, video game stuff, and things like that when talking about the war. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I do understand why some people do it. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Junebug72, who says, good night, thank you again, and please get some rest.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, Junebug. I hope we did address your question before you did get off for the night, and I thank you once again for watching. I hope you have a great night, and I hope you do take care. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from G. Scott Deary, who says, why do they embed copyrighted jaunty tunes over scenes of death and destruction?
I don't know. I mean, like that, I guess that's a TikTok thing. Like every single TikToker out there is like, oh, how could this clip be so much better? I know. I've got to get the worst sounding copyright music from SoundCloud and put it on there. And there's this, I know that there's like some Ukrainian music out there, but there's this one that drives me crazy, okay? And I have to admit, I just don't like it. It's this one song, and I know y'all probably heard about it before, and it's where the Ukrainians will be doing something on the clip, and then you hear, and then it goes into like this little jaunty little flute song. I don't like that one at all. I don't know why, but it just doesn't like jive with me in any way. And whenever I hear it, I'm like, oh no, it's that one. But yes, I don't know why they do it. I don't really like it either. But I guess it is just something they do. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Jason Bourne again. He says, I'm sure if Navalny would take control as the president of Russia, things would only become better and better between Russia and the West.
Wait, who would become president?
Navalny.
Navalny. Yes, I can agree with that. He did run into a Western country to escape persecution in Russia. I think he would actually be pretty friendly with the West, considering that. Hopefully he can make some kind of ground there, but usually political opponents of the powers that be in Russia never really make it far. But still, I have high hopes for him, and I hope that that is the case for him. So I thank you very much for the support, and I can entirely agree that I think that relations with the West would improve with him at the helm. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $4 donation from RDY4THDLL, who says, is taking the Azovstal plant the goal for Putin for the May 9th declaration?
Can you read that one again? I was kind of getting distracted by everyone laughing at my flute impression.
So he said, is taking the Azovstal plant the goal for Putin for the May 9th declaration?
It may be, because Mariupol is the most important city they're actually on the cusp of taking entirely, and so if they are able to wipe out the defenders in the Azovstal, maybe that's what they're going to do on May 9th, take Mariupol and go, we've won, and then act like the war's over. I don't know. I mean, like, they keep on saying the bar lower and lower so that way they can hopefully jump over it, but they still keep on mercilessly just smacking themselves right in between the legs with the bar as they continuously try and lower it and lower it where they can actually meet their own poor standards. So I thank you very much for the support. I think that may actually be what the Russians are trying to do, but we will have to wait and see on May 9th if that was the case. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Simulus, who says, the reason for Russia being behind is due to them not being able to establish freedom. Most of their government is huge and turns inevitably into kleptocracy.
That's true. I can't agree with that. But also on top of that, you do have to remember that the Russians are literally, I mean, like, this isn't meant as like a degrading thing or anything, but they're literally just culturally backwards. Like, they're like the amount of technology and actual cultural progression from the western side of Europe that actually made it to Russia was always way far behind. I mean, like, it's so far behind. Like, going into Russia in any time of history, even kind of now, like, most of the country was just living in a backwards age. Like, for example, in Soviet times, in the Western world, it was normal to have a phone in a house. You know, it was like a phone. It was like one of those wall phones with the cord on it. I don't know what the exact name of those was. Of course, wasn't alive for them to be around a lot, but I remember them a little bit when I was a kid. But the Russians at the time, even then, during Soviet times, were so backwards, kind of like technologically and stuff, and they're still trying to play catch up, that you had to get put on a waiting list for a phone or a car or anything like that. And usually the waiting list was like a decade or so. So by the time you got your phone, you were almost already like a quarter of the way to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that kind of gives you an idea of how backwards they were in Soviet times. And then during Tsar Peter's time, when he actually came to power, he was the Tsar of Russia, and then he looked at Western Europe and he went, wow, those guys are like embracing like the Enlightenment and stuff, and we still live like feudalistic people. Maybe we need to modernize. And so he was the first guy in Russia ever who went, wow, those guys in the West are really far ahead of us. Maybe we need to catch up. And then afterwards, that was literally just the stance of the Russians from then on. It's like, damn, like, they've got nuclear weapons over there. Maybe we need to catch up. Or, wow, they actually have indoor air conditioning. Maybe we need that too. And they were doing that for the rest of their history ever since Tsar Peter. So, really just historically and culturally, they're just behind the times just because of their location in Europe. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, I want to recognize a $2 donation from Rob Scott. Thank you very much, Rob, for your donation to the channel. Up next, we have a $2 donation from Honest M, who says, Sunday's fundraiser, get Matt a new computer fund.
Yeah, I was thinking about that right now. Speaking about like his computer and stuff, if y'all remember that video we watched earlier in the stream where all that smoke was coming out of the tank turret, that's Matthew's room every single time I open it. Like, the MacBook's over there like jumping around on the desk and screaming and smoking and stuff, and whenever I open up his room, there's like red lights flashing and alarms going off because the MacBook's burning up. So I can't agree with that. Hopefully it doesn't go like the Challenger mode here in a bit, because it's getting close to that. Like, we're wondering if that thing can live on. So I don't know. Maybe that'll be something we try and fundraise for, but I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $2 donation from CA Lags, who says, Orc equals overrated Russian combatant.
That's about the best description I've ever heard of that, and I like that one. So I thank you very much for the support. I thank you for sharing what that may mean with us, or what it may mean to you. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, Daniel Turner, which is the last super chat of the night, puts in a $2 donation. Excuse me, I'm stuttering like crazy here. And he says, does the enforcer have a canine companion? And yes, we do have a canine companion. We actually have a small army of corgis that we keep in the basement.
Yes, we keep them here in the basement with us. They're precious little corgis. I love them to death. One of them is called, and his name is entirely original, okay? His name is Mr. Corgi, and then the other one's named Sheba. Love them to death. Both of them are very special in their own ways to me, but I haven't always had a huge obsession with corgis, but I did, and luckily I was having a huge obsession with them when we were getting dogs, and so we got some, and I just love them to bits. They're incredibly good dogs. Highly recommend y'all go get some. And with that, we've reached the end of the Super Chat questions, and we're now going to move on to the questions from the live chat. We're going to answer 3 of them because we're a little pressed for time, so we won't be doing 5 tonight. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So first up, we have a question from the Vicious Tuna. The Vicious Tuna says, Enforcer, I'm a bit of an oceanographic nut, just not buying the whole Poseidon missile theory. Wouldn't it also flood Scandinavia, Denmark, the Baltics, and even St. Petersburg?
St. Petersburg is a little bit of a stretch because that tsunami would have to travel over Denmark and Sweden to actually make it to St. Petersburg, and also the Baltics as well. So I'm not really sure about that. And also, I'm not really sure about the hypothesized tsunami in the first place. That could, of course, just be some television puffery and showmanship there, because the idea of a tsunami being that large and flowing over the entirety of Britain, which would be hundreds of miles from length to end, it would be 400 miles that tsunami would have to travel over land if it exploded up near the Hebrides. I'm not really sure how that's pronounced, but still, I'm very skeptical about a tsunami actually being that powerful. Usually a tsunami is not that strong, and of course there have been atomic and nuclear weapons exploded underwater or in the Pacific, and we've never seen them produce tsunamis that just travel hundreds of miles that are hundreds or if not thousands of feet tall. So I hope that kind of addresses the question. I am a little bit skeptical about the claims that were made by that Russian guy, but still, the fact that he was talking about annihilating the entire British people was the crazy part about that. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from Cherry Patterson, who says, is Donbass holding, or is it getting worse for the people in that city? I do believe in my heart, and I mean this, Ukraine will retain their country in the end of this horrific war.
Well, I thank you very much for the kind words that you've given to the Ukrainians. And to answer that question, the Donbass is not a city; it's actually a region. And the cities that are within the Donbass that are in Ukrainian control right now are Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Slovyansk, Kramatorsk. I believe Volnovakha is still within Ukrainian control. And then there's a whole bunch of smaller ones, but those are really the large ones that they control right now. And I don't think the situation is getting worse for the Ukrainians. It appears that they are still holding just fine, and there's no indication that they're actually going to collapse anytime soon. So it does appear, as of now, with the offensive being 2 weeks in at this point, that the Russians have kind of entered a stalemate with them, and it doesn't really look like that's going to change. And so I think the Ukrainians will actually hold on to the Donbass incredibly well, and I don't think it's under threat of being lost. So I hope that answers the question. And with that, we are moving on to the last question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who got in the question?
And the last question of the night goes to Kate Thomas, who says, Enforcer, what are your thoughts on if the Russians are using their violent criminals and dropping them in Ukraine?
Oh, I'm not really sure. I mean, like, they may be. There was, of course, penal battalions in World War II, but I don't think they're doing that now. But, you know, of course, I don't really know. I mean, like, on top of that, the normal Russian soldier could just be a criminal at heart, and so that's why they're doing all these heinous things, like killing civilians left and right with their own bare hands. So with that, unfortunately, that was kind of a brief answer, but I think that answered it as about as best as I could. And so with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. It has, of course, been a pleasure reporting the news, and I hope you all have gotten something out of it that's been informational or new. Of course, if you are new to the stream, you've watched all the way through the questions segment, you're probably hooked. And so if you would like, make sure to hit the subscribe button and also hit the bell button so that way you're notified whenever these streams come live. They do come live every single day of the week except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be pushing the actual start of the show back to 10:10 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow again. So that way we can set up a waiting room and have everyone sit around for a bit. So that way we can have everyone who wants to be here to listen to the anthem, listen to it, and also enjoy the stream a little bit more, considering that it does feel kind of rushed to me at this point, doing it that early. So with that, I thank you all for coming tonight, and I will see y'all all again tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern time to cover the Day 72 news, and that will put us only 3 days away from Victory Day. So thank you all once again, and I hope you all have a great night. Take care, and I'll see y'all around.